Sometimes the people we judge the hardest are the ones who'll change us forever. I'm about to tell you about Clara Wells, a CEO who thought she was chasing a thief through Manhattan's dark streets, only to discover something that would shatter everything she believed about success, morality, and what it really means to be human. Stay with me until the end of this story and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale of unexpected redemption travels across the world. The numbers never lied. That's what Clara Wells had built her entire empire on: cold, hard facts that couldn't be argued with, manipulated, or twisted by human emotion. Numbers were clean, numbers were honest, and right now the numbers were screaming that someone was stealing from her. She sat in her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Wells Logistics headquarters, the Manhattan skyline glittering before her like a circuit board of ambition and money. Her fingers drummed against the mahogany desk as she stared at the inventory report spread across her dual monitors. 3 months of discrepancies. Small at first. So small her accounting team had dismissed them as clerical errors. A box of latex gloves here. Industrial blankets there, medical gauze, thermal clothing, nothing massive enough to trigger alarm bells in a company that moved millions in logistics every quarter. But Clara hadn't become the youngest female CEO in the shipping industry by ignoring patterns. And this was definitely a pattern. "Miss Wells," her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your car is waiting downstairs." "Cancel it," Clara said without looking away from the screen. "I'm working late tonight." She'd been working late for the past week, ever since she'd started suspecting that the thief wasn't some sophisticated hacker or corrupt warehouse manager. No, her instincts, honed by years of reading people across negotiation tables, told her this was something more personal, more internal. The security footage had given her the first real clue 3 days ago. She'd spent hours reviewing the grainy recordings, watching the night shift cleaners move through the building's lower levels. Most of them followed the same routines, predictable as clockwork. But one man stood out: Ethan Rowe. 53 years old according to his employee file. Janitor, widowed, single father, spotless work record spanning 6 years. He came in at 9 p.m. and left at 6 a.m., 5 nights a week. Unremarkable in every way, except for the past month, when he'd started leaving earlier. Around 3:30 in the morning, he'd wheel his cleaning cart to the service elevator, descend to the basement storage area, and disappear from camera view for exactly 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Always 7 minutes. When he emerged, his cleaning cart looked the same, but his posture had changed. His shoulders sat differently, as if carrying invisible weight. And twice, just twice, the camera had caught the edge of a duffel bag beneath the industrial trash bags in his cart. Clara had cross-referenced those dates with the inventory logs. Both times, supplies had gone missing within the same 12-hour window. Now, at 11:47 p.m., she watched the real-time security feed on her laptop. The building was nearly empty except for the skeleton night crew. She'd positioned herself in a vacant office on the 38th floor, lights off, with a clear view of the service corridors through the internal camera system. Her phone buzzed. A text from her younger brother, Marcus. "Still at the office? You're going to turn into a desk chair." She ignored it. Marcus didn't understand. He'd taken his trust fund and started a boutique coffee company in Brooklyn, playing at entrepreneurship while she'd actually built something real. Something that required sacrifice, discipline, and the willingness to make hard decisions. Like firing a thief, even if he had a daughter to support. The thought made something uncomfortable twist in her chest, but she pushed it away. Sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford. The moment you started making exceptions, making decisions based on feelings instead of facts, everything fell apart. She'd learned that from her father before his company collapsed, taking his reputation and eventually his will to live with it. No. Numbers didn't lie, and people who stole, regardless of their reasons, had to face consequences. On the screen, a figure appeared in the hallway of the basement level. Ethan Rowe, pushing his cleaning cart with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He wore the standard janitor uniform, navy blue work pants, and a matching shirt with Wells Logistics embroidered over the pocket. Even through the low-resolution camera feed, Clara could see he was a big man, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped graying hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested a life lived harder than the one he was currently leading. He paused outside the storage room door. Clara's pulse quickened as she watched him glance both ways down the corridor, a guilty gesture if she'd ever seen one. Then he pulled out his keyring. He shouldn't have had a key to that room. Those were restricted to inventory managers and senior staff. Another strike against him. The door opened. Ethan slipped inside. Clara checked her watch, counting. At 7 minutes, she'd head down there, catch him red-handed, and this unpleasant business would be over. But as she sat in the darkness of the empty office, something nagged at her. She pulled up Ethan's employee file again, reading through details she'd already memorized. Before working at Wells Logistics, he'd been a medic in the Army, served 2 tours in Afghanistan, honorable discharge. His wife Sarah had died 4 years ago, cancer, according to the insurance claims. He had 1 daughter, Emma, age 8 years old. The same age Clara had been when her own mother left, unable to handle the pressure of being married to a man whose business was hemorrhaging money and respect. She shook her head sharply. This was exactly the kind of emotional reasoning she needed to avoid. An 8-year-old daughter didn't give someone the right to steal. It just made the situation more tragic. 6 minutes had passed. Clara stood, smoothing down her black pencil skirt and adjusting her blazer. She'd confronted hostile takeover attempts in boardrooms full of men who thought she was too young, too female, too ambitious. A janitor with sticky fingers would be simple by comparison. She was halfway to the elevator when her phone buzzed again. This time it was her CFO, Gavin Cross. Quarterly projections are stellar. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate? Gavin, always networking, always angling. He'd been her father's protege once, back before the collapse. When Clara had taken over the reconstituted company 5 years ago, she'd kept him on because he understood the business inside and out. But there was something about him that always felt slightly oily, like he was perpetually calculating how every interaction could benefit him. She texted back, "Maybe. Busy week." Then she silenced her phone and stepped into the elevator. The descent to the basement seemed to take forever. Clara caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. 34 years old, expertly styled dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, sharp features that her ex-boyfriend had once called beautiful in a severe way before she'd ended things because he couldn't understand that her company would always come first. The doors opened onto the basement level, and the temperature immediately dropped several degrees. This was the working heart of the building: concrete floors, exposed pipes, industrial lighting that hummed with a slight flicker. Her heels clicked against the floor as she walked, each step echoing off the walls. The storage room door was still closed. Clara pressed her ear against it but heard nothing. She pulled out her master keycard. CEO privileges meant access to everything, and swiped it slowly, deliberately. The lock disengaged with a soft click. She pushed the door open. Ethan Rowe stood in the center of the room, frozen like a deer in headlights. In his hands was a cardboard box filled with medical supplies: gauze, antiseptic, latex gloves. Around him, Clara could see the evidence of his other trips: a duffel bag half filled with thermal blankets, another box containing non-perishable food items that had been requisitioned for the employee break rooms but never made it there. For a moment, neither of them moved. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across Ethan's weathered face. His eyes, a surprising pale gray, met hers with an expression she hadn't expected. Not fear, not shame, just a kind of weary resignation, as if he'd known this moment was coming and had already made peace with it. "Ms. Wells," he said quietly, setting the box down on a metal shelf with careful deliberation. His voice was deeper than she'd imagined, with a slight gravelly quality that suggested either too many cigarettes or too much shouting in his past. "I suppose you'll want an explanation." Clara stepped fully into the room, letting the door close behind her. "I suppose I will, though the evidence seems fairly self-explanatory." He nodded slowly, wiping his hands on his work pants, a nervous gesture that was the first crack in his composed exterior. "Yes, ma'am. I expect it does." "How long?" Clara asked, crossing her arms. "How long have you been stealing from my company?" "About 5 months," Ethan replied with an honesty that surprised her. "Started small, Just some leftover supplies we were going to throw out anyway. Then it got... He trailed off, looking at the boxes around them. I guess it got out of hand. Out of hand, Clara repeated the words flatly. Mr. You're talking about thousands of dollars in inventory. Do you have any idea what kind of liability this creates? What it does to our bottom line? I do. He met her eyes again. And I'm sorry for that. Truly. Sorry doesn't reimburse the company. Clara pulled out her phone. I should call security right now. Have you arrested for theft? It's what any reasonable CEO would do. You should, Ethan agreed. But he didn't move, didn't plead, just stood there with his hands at his sides, waiting. Clara found herself hesitating, and she hated it. This was supposed to be simple. Catch the thief, implement consequences, move on. But something about the way he stood there, not defiant, not cowering, just accepting, made her pause. Why? The question came out before she could stop it. You have a decent job, benefits. Why risk all of that? For the first time, emotion flickered across Ethan's face. His jaw tightened, and he looked away from her, focusing on something over her shoulder. Because people are dying, Ms. Wells. People are always dying, Clara said, hating how cold she sounded even to herself. That doesn't give you the right to steal. You're right, Ethan said softly. It doesn't. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of the building's HVAC system and the occasional drip of water from a pipe somewhere in the darkness beyond the storage room. Clara should have ended it there, should have made the call, let the authorities handle it, gone back to her office and her clean numerical world where right and wrong were clearly defined. But something kept her rooted to the spot. Where are you taking this stuff? She heard herself ask. Ethan's eyes snapped back to her, surprise evident in his expression. Ma'am? The supplies. Where do they go? He hesitated, and Clara could practically see him calculating how much to reveal, whether honesty would help or hurt him at this point. Finally, he seemed to make a decision. There's a spot, under the West Side overpass near the old meatpacking district. People gather there, homeless folks mostly, families who fell through the cracks. I've been bringing them what I can, food, blankets, basic medical supplies. He gestured to the box of gauze and antiseptic. A lot of them have untreated wounds, infections. Living on the street, they can't exactly waltz into an emergency room. There are shelters, Clara said, services for the homeless. Have you ever tried to get into a shelter, Ms. Wells? Ethan's voice took on an edge for the first time. They're full. Waiting lists months long, and a lot of the people I help, they don't trust institutions. Veterans with PTSD, undocumented families afraid of being separated, addicts who've been turned away too many times. He shook his head. The system doesn't work for everyone. So you decided to create your own system, Clara said, using my company's resources. Yes. He didn't apologize again, which somehow made it worse, or more honest, she couldn't decide which. Clara walked slowly around the room, taking inventory with her eyes. Everything here was practical, nothing frivolous or unnecessary. Medical supplies, thermal clothing, non-perishable food, the kind of items that could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe for someone living on the margins. You were a medic, she said, remembering his file. In the service. Yes, ma'am. 68W Combat Medic Specialist, 2 tours in Kandahar. And your wife died 4 years ago. She saw his shoulders stiffen. Sarah. Cancer. She fought it for 3 years before... He didn't finish the sentence. Clara stopped pacing and turned to face him directly. Mr. Rowe, I'm trying to understand why a man with a young daughter would risk his job, his ability to provide for her, to help strangers. They're not strangers, Ethan said quietly. Not after you've bandaged their wounds and listened to their stories. Not after you've watched kids younger than Emma, sleeping in cardboard boxes because their parents lost everything. His voice grew rougher. I couldn't help Sarah. I tried everything, but I couldn't save her. Maybe I'm just trying to save somebody. The raw honesty in his words hit Clara like a physical force. She recognized that tone, the desperate need to fix something, anything, to make sense of a loss that defied all logic and fairness. She'd heard it in her father's voice in the months before he'd given up entirely. "This is still theft," Clara said, but her voice had lost some of its sharp edge. "I know." "I should fire you, press charges." "I know." "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and Clara saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not pleading, but a kind of challenge. "Because maybe you want to see it first. See what your supplies are actually doing. Then decide if it's theft or something else." "Something else?" Clara raised an eyebrow. "What else would it be?" "Insurance," Ethan said, "against forgetting we're all human." The words hung in the air between them like a dare. Clara knew she should refuse, should maintain her professional distance, should do what the numbers and logic demanded. But instead she found herself saying, "When do you go?" "To this place under the overpass." "Tonight. I was planning to leave at 3:30, like usual." Clara checked her watch. 3:17 a.m. "You were going to bring all this on the subway?" "My car's parked in the employee lot. I load up, drive over, spend an hour or two, then come back and finish my shift." "That's why you've been leaving early," Clara said, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "You're not finishing your shift, you're splitting it." "Yes, ma'am." She should have been angry at the deception, at the calculated way he'd manipulated his schedule to cover his theft. Instead, Clara found herself impressed by the logistics of it. He'd created an efficient system within the constraints of his job and the building's security. It was almost elegant in its simplicity. "I'm coming with you," she heard herself say. Ethan's eyes widened. "Ms. Wells, I don't think—" "You asked me to see it before I decided. Fine, I'll see it. But I'm not taking your word for where this stuff is going. I'm going to verify it myself." She straightened her blazer. "Consider it an executive audit." He stared at her as if she'd suddenly started speaking another language. "You want to come? To the homeless camp. Under the overpass. Unless you prefer I just call the police now?" "No, ma'am." Ethan shook his head slowly, a strange expression crossing his face, something between amazement and concern. "But it's not a place where people like you usually go." "People like me?" Clara felt a flash of irritation. "What does that mean?" "Rich people," Ethan said bluntly. "Powerful people. People who can solve their problems with a phone call and a credit card." He gestured to her designer suit, her expensive watch. "No offense, Ms. Wells, but you're going to stand out." Clara looked down at her outfit, then back at him. He had a point. "I have a gym bag in my office, jeans and a sweatshirt. Give me 10 minutes. "You're serious about this?" "Mr. Rowe, in my experience, the best way to understand a problem is to see it firsthand. You're claiming this is more than simple theft. Prove it." He studied her for another moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But there are rules. You don't take photos. You don't give anyone your real name. And you don't make promises you can't keep. These people have been disappointed enough." "Understood. And Ms. Wells," Ethan's voice stopped her as she turned toward the door. "Bring cash if you have it. Small bills. A lot of the folks there need bus fare or money for medicine. I usually bring what I can, but there's never enough." Clara felt something uncomfortable twist in her stomach, the implication that she should pay money to people who were receiving supplies stolen from her own company. But she just nodded. "How much?" "Whatever you're comfortable with. Every bit helps." She left him in the storage room and made her way back to her office, her mind spinning. What was she doing? This was insane. She should be calling her head of security right now, having Ethan Rowe escorted from the building in handcuffs. Instead, she was preparing to follow him into what sounded like a dangerous situation in one of the worst parts of Manhattan. But beneath the logical objections, something else hummed, a curiosity she couldn't quite suppress. When was the last time she'd done something that wasn't calculated, that wasn't part of a long-term strategic plan? When was the last time she'd seen the parts of the city that existed beyond her penthouse and her corner office? In her office, Clara quickly changed into jeans, a dark sweatshirt, and the running shoes she kept for her rare gym visits. She pulled her hair out of its bun, letting it fall around her shoulders. In the mirror on her private bathroom door, she looked younger, less severe, almost like the person she'd been before ambition and loss had hardened her into the woman she'd become. She grabbed her wallet and counted the cash, $400 in various bills. It seemed simultaneously like a lot and not nearly enough. At 3:28, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Service entrance, silver Honda Civic. Clara took a breath, grabbed her purse, and headed for the elevator. As the floors ticked downward, she tried to remember the last time she'd felt this kind of nervous anticipation. Maybe her first major business pitch, or maybe never. The service entrance was deserted except for the security guard, Mike, who barely glanced up from his phone as she passed. Outside, rain had started to fall, a cold, miserable October drizzle that made the streetlights blur into halos of amber light. The silver Honda Civic was idling near the loading dock, exactly as promised. As Clara approached, she could see the back seat and trunk were loaded with supplies. Ethan leaned across and pushed the passenger door open from inside. "Last chance to change your mind," he said as she climbed in. The car smelled like coffee and something else. Antiseptic, she realized. Medical supplies. "Just drive, Mr. Rowe." He pulled away from the building, and Manhattan swallowed them whole. At this hour, the streets were mostly empty except for the occasional taxi and the trucks making early morning deliveries. They drove in silence for several minutes, heading west toward the river. Clara watched the neighborhoods change through the rain-streaked window. The gleaming glass towers of Midtown gave way to older buildings, then to industrial warehouses and streets that looked like they'd been forgotten by the city's endless gentrification. Graffiti covered the walls. Storefronts were boarded up or protected behind security gates. "I grew up about 3 blocks from here," Ethan said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Back before it got bad. My dad worked at the packing house. We had a little apartment, nothing fancy, but it was home." He gestured at a particularly desolate stretch of street. "That used to be a corner store where we'd buy candy. Now look at it." Clara looked. The building was a gutted shell, windows smashed, covered in layers of spray paint. "The city changes," she said. "That's just economics." "Is it?" Ethan glanced at her. "Or is it that some people matter and some people don't? Some neighborhoods get investment and others get forgotten." "That's an oversimplification." "Maybe." He turned down a street that seemed to lead toward the elevated highway. "Or maybe it's the simple truth, and we just dress it up in complicated language to feel better about it." They pulled into a space beneath an overpass where the highway roared overhead. The area was shielded from the rain but dark, lit only by a few distant streetlights and what looked like battery-powered lanterns scattered among the shadows. As Clara's eyes adjusted, she began to make out shapes, makeshift tents constructed from tarps and cardboard, shopping carts filled with belongings, huddled figures wrapped in blankets and sleeping bags. Ethan turned off the engine and looked at her. "Welcome to the other Manhattan, Ms. Wells. The one that doesn't show up in your quarterly reports." Clara's hand remained frozen on the door handle as she took in the scene before her. This wasn't how poverty looked in movies or charity commercials. This was raw, more visceral. The smell hit her first, a mixture of unwashed bodies, damp concrete, urine, and something else she couldn't identify but that made her stomach clench. The sound of the highway overhead created a constant roar that seemed to press down on everything, making the space feel both exposed and claustrophobic at the same time. "You can stay in the car if you want," Ethan said quietly, already opening his door. No judgment. But Clara found herself stepping out into the cold October air, her expensive running shoes landing in a puddle she hadn't seen. The water soaked through immediately, and she suppressed a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Stay close to me," Ethan instructed, moving to the trunk. "And let me do the talking at first. Some folks here are skittish around new faces." He pulled out the duffel bag and handed Clara one of the boxes, the one filled with medical supplies. It was heavier than she'd expected, and she had to adjust her grip to keep from dropping it. As they walked toward the encampment, figures began to emerge from the shadows. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, every instinct screaming at her that this was dangerous, that she didn't belong here. A man stumbled past them, muttering to himself in a language that might have been English but was so slurred she couldn't tell. His clothes hung off his skeletal frame, and his eyes were wild, unfocused. "That's Tommy," Ethan said softly. "Schizophrenic. Off his meds. He's harmless, just lost." "Shouldn't he be in a hospital?" Clara whispered. "Probably. But the hospitals discharge them after 72 hours, and there's nowhere for them to go, so they end up here." They reached what appeared to be the center of the camp, where someone had set up a series of milk crates arranged in a circle. A small propane camping stove sat in the middle, and around it, people were beginning to gather, drawn by the sound of Ethan's car, Clara realized. They'd been waiting for him. "Evening, everyone," Ethan said, his voice carrying a warmth that Clara hadn't heard in the car. "Sorry I'm a bit later than usual. Brought the supplies we talked about, plus some extra blankets." "Mr. Rowe!" A small voice cut through the murmur of greetings, and Clara watched as a child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 7, darted forward. She was wearing a pink jacket that was too thin for the weather, and her dark hair was matted and tangled. But her smile was radiant as she threw her arms around Ethan's waist. "Hey there, Rosie," Ethan said, ruffling her hair. "How's that cough I was worried about?" "Better," the girl announced proudly. "Mama made me drink all the medicine like you said." A woman emerged from one of the tents. Early 30s, Clara guessed, but looking older. Her face was drawn, exhausted, and there was a wariness in her eyes that never quite faded, even when she smiled at Ethan. "Thank you again for that. The cough syrup really helped." "That's what I like to hear." Ethan set down his duffel bag and gestured to Clara. "This is my friend. She's here to help tonight." Clara felt a dozen pairs of eyes turn toward her, assessing, suspicious. She forced herself to meet their gazes, to smile even though her face felt stiff with discomfort. "Any friend of Mr. Rowe's is welcome here," an older black man said, rising from his seat on a milk crate with some difficulty. His right leg was bandaged, poorly, Clara noticed, and he moved with a pronounced limp. "Name's Curtis. I'm what you might call the unofficial mayor of this little community." "Nice to meet you," Clara managed, not sure if she should offer to shake his hand. The decision was made for her when Curtis extended his own, calloused and missing 2 fingers. She shook it, trying not to stare at the stumps. "Lost them in a factory accident," Curtis said matter-of-factly, catching her look. 23 years I worked that line. One day the safety guard failed, and boom, no more fingers. Workers' comp ran out, medical bills piled up, lost the house, lost the wife. Funny how fast you can go from middle class to this." "I'm sorry," Clara said, and meant it. "Ancient history now." Curtis waved his damaged hand dismissively. "What matters is the present. And presently, we got about 40 folks here tonight who could use what Mr. Rowe brought. So let's get to work." Ethan had already begun unpacking supplies with practiced efficiency. From the duffel bag, he pulled out a large pot, cans of soup, a jug of water. Within minutes, he had soup heating on the propane stove, and the smell of chicken broth began to mingle with the less pleasant odors of the encampment. "Can you help distribute the blankets?" Ethan asked Clara, pointing to a bundle of thermal blankets, the ones she recognized from her company's inventory. "Start with the families. Kids and elderly get priority." Clara picked up the blankets, the synthetic material rough against her palms, and looked around helplessly. She had no idea where to start, how to approach these people. In her boardroom, she commanded respect with a single look. Here, she was utterly out of her depth. "I'll show you," a voice said. Clara turned to find Rosie, the little girl, looking up at her with solemn dark eyes. "I know where everybody sleeps." "Okay," Clara said, grateful for the guide. "Lead the way." As they walked through the encampment, Rosie kept up a steady stream of chatter that Clara suspected was designed to fill the awkward silence. "That's Mr. Peterson over there. He used to be a teacher, but then he got sick and couldn't work anymore. That tent with the blue tarp is where the Rodriguez family stays. There's 6 of them, and the baby cries a lot at night, but Mama says we shouldn't complain because they can't help it." "You and your mother live here?" Clara asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Uh-huh. For 8 months now. We used to have an apartment, but then Mama's boss said she couldn't bring me to work anymore, and she couldn't afford daycare and couldn't afford the rent without working, so we left." Rosie said this all in one breath, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "But it's okay. Mr. Rowe helps us. He's going to help Mama find a new job soon." Claire's throat tightened. This child, this beautiful, resilient child, was living under a highway overpass because the system had failed her at every turn. And she spoke about it with such casual acceptance, as if she'd already learned that this was just how the world worked for people like her. They stopped at a tent where an elderly Asian woman sat on a folding chair, wrapped in what looked like every piece of clothing she owned. Her face was deeply lined, and her hands shook slightly as she held a chipped mug of something steaming. "Mrs. Chen, this lady brought blankets," Rosie announced. The old woman looked up at Clara with rheumy eyes. "Very kind," she said in heavily accented English. "Very cold tonight." Clara handed her one of the thermal blankets, watching as the woman's face lit up with genuine joy at this simple gift. Thank you, Mrs. Chen kept repeating, clutching the blanket like it was made of gold. "How long have you been here?" Clara found herself asking. Mrs. Chen's smile faded. 2 years. My son, he's supposed to take care of me, but he lose job, lose house. He try very hard, but cannot take care of mother too. So I come here. Is better than burden to family. You're not a burden, Clara said automatically, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. What did she know about this woman's situation? About the impossible choices families had to make when the safety net failed? They continued through the camp, and with each tent, each person, Clara felt her carefully constructed worldview cracking. There was the veteran missing both legs, living in a wheelchair because the VA housing list was 2 years long. The young mother with a black eye who flinched whenever anyone moved too quickly. The teenager, couldn't have been more than 16, who'd run away from foster care and now survived by recycling cans. These weren't the faceless statistics she'd seen in reports. They weren't numbers to be analyzed and filed away. They were human beings with stories, with dignity, with dreams that had been deferred or destroyed by circumstances often beyond their control. By the time Clara made her way back to the center of the camp, Ethan had the soup ready. A line had formed, orderly, patient, everyone waiting their turn. She watched as he ladled out portions into an assortment of mismatched containers, plastic bowls, old coffee cups, even a few empty tin cans. No one complained about the size of their serving or asked for more. They just accepted what they were given with quiet gratitude. "You want to help?" Ethan asked, nodding toward a box of bread rolls. "One per person." Clara took her position in the makeshift assembly line, handing out rolls as people filed past. Some met her eyes and smiled. Others kept their gazes down, as if ashamed to be receiving charity. One man, maybe 30, with prison tattoos visible on his neck, paused in front of her. "You're that CEO lady," he said suddenly. "From Wells Logistics. I seen your picture in the paper." Clara's heart stopped. She glanced at Ethan, but he was focused on serving soup. My cousin used to work in your warehouse. Said you was fair, tough, but fair." The man took his bread roll. "Respect for coming down here. Most people like you, they don't see us. We're invisible." He moved on before Clara could respond, leaving her standing there with a bread roll in her hand and a lump in her throat. After everyone had been fed, Ethan pulled out his medical supplies. "Anyone need patching up tonight?" he called out. Several hands went up. Clara watched as Ethan transformed into someone else, the combat medic he'd once been, efficient and focused. He cleaned wounds, changed bandages, dispensed advice and over-the-counter medications from a bag that Clara realized he must have purchased with his own money. "You do this every night?" she asked quietly as he worked on a nasty cut on someone's arm. 3-4 times a week when I can manage it, more when the weather's bad." He dabbed antiseptic on the wound, ignoring the man's hiss of pain. "You'd be surprised how many people out here are dealing with infections, chronic conditions, injuries that never healed right, and they can't exactly show up at a clinic without insurance or ID. There must be programs. Ethan's laugh was bitter as he began wrapping gauze around the man's arm. "You know what programs require, Ms. Wells. Paperwork, documentation, fixed addresses, ability to navigate bureaucracy. A lot of these folks, they're too sick, too traumatized, too mentally ill to jump through all those hoops. So they suffer, and sometimes they die, from things that could have been prevented with basic medical care." The man whose arm he'd been bandaging spoke up. "Lost my buddy last winter, Marcus. He had pneumonia, wouldn't go to the hospital because he had warrants. Not serious warrants, just unpaid tickets, stupid stuff. But he was scared they'd arrest him, so he stayed here and tried to tough it out." The man's voice broke. "Found him one morning, frozen in his sleeping bag. He was 27 years old." Clara felt sick. She'd lived her entire life less than 5 miles from this place, and she'd never known. never wanted to know. It was easier to believe that poverty was a failure of character, that people who ended up homeless had somehow earned their fate through bad decisions or lack of ambition. But standing here, listening to their stories, she couldn't maintain that comfortable fiction. "I want to show you something," Curtis said, appearing at her elbow. "If you got a minute?" Clara followed him to a tent that was larger than the others, with a hand-painted sign hanging from the entrance that read "The Ladle" in cheerful letters. Inside it was surprisingly organized. Shelves made from milk crates holding donated books, a charging station cobbled together from a car battery and power strip, a bulletin board covered in handwritten notes. "This is what Mr. Rowe really built," Curtis explained, pride evident in his voice. "It ain't much, but it's ours. We got a system here. Everyone contributes what they can. The Ladle, that's what we call this whole operation. It's become more than just a soup kitchen. It's a community." Clara looked at the bulletin board more closely. Among the notes were job listings, information about free services, even a schedule for volunteer tutoring sessions for the kids in the camp. "See this?" Curtis pointed to a note card covered in childish handwriting. "That's from Rosie's friend Marcus. Different Marcus, not the one who died. Kid's 11 years old, been living out here with his mom for 6 months. But he's been teaching the younger kids their ABCs, using books Mr. Rowe brings from the library." "This is incredible," Clara said softly. "It's survival," Curtis corrected. "When the world forgets about you, you got to remember each other. Mr. Rowe, he gave us the tools and the supplies, but we built this together. We take care of our own." They emerged from the tent to find Ethan surrounded by children. He was reading from a battered copy of Where the Wild Things Are, doing silly voices that had the kids giggling despite the late hour and the cold. Rosie sat on his lap, her thumb in her mouth, eyes heavy with sleep. "He's good with them," Clara observed. "Should be. He's got his own daughter." Curtis lit a cigarette, cupping his hand around the flame against the wind. "She don't know about this place. Emma, that's her name. Mr. Rowe keeps this part of his life separate, says he doesn't want her worrying." "How do you know about his daughter?" Curtis smiled. "We talk, real talk, not the kind where people are performing for each other. Out here, pretense don't survive long. Mr. Rowe told me once that after his wife died, he felt like he was drowning. Going through the motions for his kid, but dead inside. Then one night he was driving home late, saw some folks under this overpass, and something in him just stopped. He got out of his car with the first aid kit he keeps in his trunk and asked if anyone needed help." "And that's how the Ladle started?" "That's how Mr. Rowe started healing," Curtis said. "The Ladle came after, but yeah, that was the beginning. He kept coming back night after night, started bringing supplies, first from his own pocket, then from wherever he could find them." He gave Clara a meaningful look. "We know where the stuff comes from now, known for a while. We also know he could get in serious trouble for it." Clara felt her defenses rising. "Then you understand why what he's doing is necessary?" Curtis interrupted. "Yeah, we understand that just fine. Question is, do you?" Before Clara could respond, a commotion erupted from the far side of the camp, shouting, the sound of something crashing. Ethan was on his feet immediately, gently depositing Rosie with her mother before running toward the disturbance. Clara and Curtis followed, arriving to find 2 men locked in a struggle while others tried to pull them apart. One of them was Tommy, the schizophrenic man Clara had seen earlier. The other was younger, strung out, with the telltale sores and twitching movements of a meth addict. "He took my blanket," the younger man was screaming. "I was just gone for 5 minutes and he took my stuff." "I didn't take nothing," Tommy shouted back, his eyes wild with confusion and fear. "The voices said to move it. The voices said it wasn't safe there." Ethan waded into the fray with surprising authority. "Both of you, back off. Now!" His voice carried the unmistakable ring of command, the kind Clara imagined he'd used in combat zones. Both men hesitated, then slowly separated. "Tommy, where did you move the blanket?" Ethan asked, his tone gentler now. "Over there." Tommy pointed to a shopping cart 20 feet away. "The voices said the ground was dangerous, said there were snakes." Ethan retrieved the blanket and handed it back to the younger man, who snatched it with shaking hands. "There you go. No harm done." "He's crazy," the addict muttered. "Shouldn't be here with the rest of us." "Where should he be, Jason?" Ethan asked quietly. "You tell me where Tommy should go. The hospital that'll discharge him in 3 days? The shelter that's full? Back to the family that can't handle his episodes? Where? Jason had no answer. He just clutched his blanket and stalked away. Ethan turned to Tommy, who was rocking back and forth now, his arms wrapped around himself. Hey, buddy, you okay? The voices are loud tonight, Tommy said, tears streaming down his weathered face. They won't stop. They keep telling me things, and I don't know what's real anymore. I know. Ethan pulled a pill bottle from his medical bag. I got something that might help. Nothing strong, just something to take the edge off. Can you trust me enough to take it? Tommy nodded, his whole body shaking. Ethan dispensed 2 pills and a bottle of water, waiting patiently while Tommy swallowed them. Then he guided the older man to a quiet corner and sat with him, talking in low tones until the shaking subsided. Clara watched all of this with a growing sense of awe mixed with horror. This was the reality that existed in the shadows of her gleaming city. This was what falling through the cracks actually looked like. Not a neat statistic, but a man suffering from mental illness with nowhere to go and no one to help him except a janitor who stole medical supplies in the middle of the night. You're starting to get it, Curtis said beside her. The look on your face. I've seen it before. When reality doesn't match the story we tell ourselves about how the world works. I had no idea, Clara whispered. Most people don't. Most people don't want to know. It's easier to believe we all get what we deserve, that the successful earned it and the poor made bad choices. Simpler that way, less uncomfortable. Is that what you think I believe? Curtis shrugged. I don't know you well enough to say, but I know you came down here in your expensive jeans and your $100 running shoes, and I know you run a company that probably generates more money in a day than everyone here will see in their lifetimes. So yeah, I'm guessing your worldview is getting challenged tonight. He was right, and Clara hated it. Hated that her comfortable assumptions were being stripped away. Hated that she couldn't just write a check and fix this. Hated most of all that she'd been so willfully blind. Ethan returned, looking exhausted. Tommy settled. Should be okay until morning. Does this happen often? Clara asked. The fights? Sometimes. Tensions run high when people are cold, hungry, scared. Add in mental illness and addiction, and yeah, things can get volatile. He ran a hand over his face. It's why I try to come as often as I can. Having someone here who can mediate, who has medical training, it makes a difference. You can't save everyone, Clara said. No, Ethan agreed, but I can save someone, and maybe that someone saves someone else. Maybe we build something that outlasts us. He looked around at the encampment, at the people settling in for another cold night. That's all any of us can do, really. Show up, do what we can, hope it matters. They spent another hour making sure everyone had what they needed. Blankets distributed, medications dispensed, minor injuries treated. Clara found herself genuinely helping now, not just going through the motions. She held a flashlight while Ethan stitched up a man's hand. She helped Rosie's mother hang a tarp to create better shelter from the wind. She listened to stories and tried to remember names. At some point, someone produced a guitar, and music filled the space beneath the overpass. Sad songs mostly, ballads about loss and longing, but beautiful in their rawness. Some people sang along. Others just listened, their eyes closed, transported for a few minutes to somewhere else. Clara found herself sitting on a milk crate next to Ethan, accepting a cup of soup even though she wasn't hungry. The hot liquid burned her throat, but it was grounding, real. Thank you, she said finally, for showing me this. Are you going to fire me? Ethan asked bluntly. Clara had been dreading that question. The logical answer was yes. He'd admitted to theft. He'd violated company policy. He'd manipulated his schedule and stolen inventory worth thousands of dollars. Any CEO with an ounce of business sense would fire him immediately and prosecute to the fullest extent of the law as a deterrent to other potential thieves. But Clara had never felt less logical in her life. I don't know, she admitted. What you're doing here, it's remarkable. It's also illegal. I can't just ignore that. I'm not asking you to ignore it. Ethan set down his soup cup. I knew the risks when I started, knew eventually I'd get caught. I just hoped to do some good before that happened. Why didn't you just ask for help? Start a legitimate charity? There are ways to do this that don't involve theft. Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Ms. Wells, do you know how hard it is to start a charity? The paperwork, the legal fees, the tax status applications? I'm a janitor with a high school diploma and a daughter to support. I don't have the time or the resources for all that. And meanwhile, people are suffering right now. Not next year after I file the right forms, right now. So you decided to steal. I decided to act. He met her eyes directly. Maybe it was wrong. Probably was. But doing nothing felt worse. They sat in silence for a while, the guitar music and highway noise washing over them. Clara thought about her father, about how he'd spent years playing by the rules, following all the proper procedures, trying to save his company through legitimate means. And in the end, it had all collapsed anyway, and he died believing he was a failure. What if the rules were the problem? What if the system itself was broken in ways that no amount of procedural compliance could fix? Tell me about your wife, Clara said suddenly. She wasn't sure why she wanted to know, only that it seemed important. Ethan's face softened and tightened at the same time. Sarah, we met in college. Well, when I was taking night classes after the Army. She was getting her teaching degree. Wanted to work with special needs kids. He smiled at the memory. She was so goddamn optimistic, believed everyone deserved a chance, that the right support could help anyone succeed. She sounds wonderful. She was. She really was. His voice grew rough. When she got sick, I watched that optimism drain away. Watched the medical bills pile up despite our insurance. Watched her lose her job because she couldn't work through the chemo. Watched the system she believed in fail her at every turn. I'm sorry. The last thing she said to me, Ethan stopped, swallowed hard. She said, don't let them make you bitter. Find a way to stay human. I didn't understand what she meant at the time. I was too angry, too destroyed. But then I found this place, these people, and I realized this is how I stay human, by seeing them, by helping when I can. Clara felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she'd built brick by careful brick over years of disappointment and loss. My father killed himself, she heard herself say, words she never spoke aloud. His company failed. Everyone abandoned him, and he decided the world would be better off without him in it. Jesus, Ethan breathed. I was 14, found him in the garage. Clara stared at her hands, unable to meet his eyes. After that, I promised myself I'd never be vulnerable like that. Never let emotion cloud my judgment. Never trust anything that couldn't be quantified and measured. Is that working out for you? The question was gentle, but landed like a blow. Clara looked around at the encampment, at Curtis checking on people before bed, at Rosie's mother singing softly to her daughter, at Tommy sleeping peacefully for the first time all night. This was messy and complicated and completely illogical. It shouldn't work. By every rational measure, Ethan's operation was unsustainable, illegal, and foolish. And yet it was beautiful. It was human in a way Clara's spreadsheets and quarterly reports would never be. No, she admitted, it's not working out at all. They packed up around 5 a.m., leaving behind supplies and the promise to return soon. As they drove back through the city, dawn was beginning to break over Manhattan's skyline, painting the glass towers in shades of pink and gold. To Clara, they looked different now, not symbols of achievement, but monuments to inequality, gleaming while people suffered in their shadows. What happens now? Ethan asked as they pulled into the Wells Logistics parking lot. The night shift was ending, early morning workers beginning to arrive. Clara sat in the car, her mind racing. She should fire him. She should call the police. She should protect her company and her liability and all the things a good CEO was supposed to protect. But instead, she thought about Rosie's smile and Mrs. Chen's gratitude and Tommy's tears and Curtis's quiet dignity. She thought about her father in that garage, defeated by a world that measured worth only in dollars. She thought about Ethan's wife telling him to stay human. I need time to think, she said finally. Don't come in tomorrow night. Take a few days off, paid. I need to figure this out. And the ladle? Keep doing what you're doing, for now. But Ethan, she turned to face him, we need to find a better way, a sustainable way. Because eventually, someone else is going to notice those missing supplies, and I might not be the one who catches you next time. He nodded slowly. Thank you, Ms. Wells. Clara, she said, if we're going to figure this out together, you should call me Clara. She got out of the car and walked toward the building, still wearing her jeans and sweatshirt, her hair loose around her shoulders. Mike, the security guard, did a double take when he saw her. Miss Wells, you okay? You look different, Clara supplied. I feel different, Mike. I feel completely different. She rode the elevator up to her office as the city woke around her, and for the first time in years, Clara Wells had no idea what she was going to do next. The uncertainty should have terrified her. Instead, it felt strangely like hope. Clara stood in her office shower 20 minutes later, watching dirt and grime swirl down the drain along with what felt like layers of her former self. The hot water couldn't quite reach the cold that had settled into her bones, not from the weather, but from the recognition of how much suffering existed just miles from where she conducted her business every day. She dressed in the spare suit she kept in her closet, pulled her hair back into its usual severe bun, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked exactly the same as yesterday, but Clara knew something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. Her phone buzzed with accumulated messages from the night. Her brother Marcus asking if she was alive. Gavin Cross confirming their meeting about quarterly projections. Her assistant with a dozen scheduling questions. The normal machinery of her life grinding forward as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Clara just didn't know what to do about it yet. She spent the morning in meetings, nodding at the right moments and signing off on decisions that felt suddenly trivial. A dispute over vendor contracts. A presentation about optimizing warehouse space. Numbers and projections and efficiency metrics that had consumed her entire world just 24 hours ago now seemed to exist in a different dimension, disconnected from the reality she'd witnessed under that overpass. Are you even listening? Gavin's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. They were in her office, reviewing the quarterly report he'd prepared. I said the profit margins are up 3%. That's excellent news. Yes, Clara said distantly. Excellent. Gavin leaned back in his chair, studying her with those calculating eyes that always made her feel like he was mentally tallying her worth. He was 48, impeccably dressed as always, in a suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. His silver hair was styled perfectly, his nails manicured, his smile revealing teeth too white to be natural. Everything about Gavin Cross was polished and professional and slightly reptilian. You seem distracted, he observed. Everything all right? Fine. Just a long night. Ah, yes. I noticed you were here quite late. Security logs show you left at 3:30 a.m. He said this casually, but Clara felt a warning tingle at the base of her spine. Burning the midnight oil? Something like that. Well, don't burn yourself out. The company needs you sharp. Gavin gathered his papers with precise movements. Speaking of which, I've been reviewing some of our operational expenses. There are some irregularities in the supply inventory I wanted to discuss. Clara's heart stopped. Irregularities. Minor ones, probably just accounting errors, but you know how I am about the details. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm sure it's nothing, but I'd like to do a full audit of the basement storage areas, just to keep everything tight. When? I was thinking next week, unless you have objections? Every instinct screamed at her to shut this down, to come up with a reason to delay, but that would only make Gavin more suspicious. No objections. Keep me posted on what you find. After he left, Clara sat at her desk with her head in her hands. An audit would expose Ethan's operation immediately. The missing supplies, the altered schedules, everything. She had maybe a week to figure out a solution before the ladle came crashing down and took Ethan with it. Her phone rang. Marcus. She let it go to voicemail, but he called again immediately. With a sigh, Clara answered. Are you dead? Her brother demanded. Because that's the only acceptable excuse for ignoring my texts all night. I'm not dead, Marcus. I'm working. You're always working. That's the problem. She could hear cafe sounds in the background. Marcus spent most of his time in his coffee shop, treating it more like a social club than a business. Listen, I'm in the neighborhood. Let me buy you lunch. I can't. That wasn't a question, Clara. You sound weird. I'm coming up. He hung up before she could protest. Clara considered locking her door, but Marcus would just camp out in the lobby until she relented. Her brother had inherited all their mother's stubborn charm, while Clara had gotten their father's rigid determination. Sometimes she envied him his easy relationships and comfortable privilege, but mostly she just found him exhausting. Marcus arrived 30 minutes later, breezing past her assistant with the confidence of someone who'd grown up wealthy and never learned to doubt his place in any room. He was 31, dressed in deliberately casual clothes that probably cost as much as formal wear, expensive jeans, a cashmere sweater, artfully messy hair that required more maintenance than Clara's severe bun. "You look terrible," he announced, dropping into the chair Gavin had vacated. "When's the last time you slept?" "Good to see you too." "I'm serious, Clara. You've got this look, the same one Dad used to get when things were falling apart. It scares me." The mention of their father created a thick silence. They rarely talked about him, preferring to leave that wound carefully bandaged and hidden away. "I'm fine," Clara said. "Just dealing with some personnel issues." "Personnel issues?" Marcus snorted. "Is that what we're calling it? Clara, you need to take a break. When's the last time you did something that wasn't work-related? Saw friends? Went on a date?" "I don't have time for—" "See, that's the problem right there. You don't have time for living. You're 34 years old and you're turning into a robot." He leaned forward, his expression softening. "I worry about you. Ever since Dad, you've been so focused on being successful that you've forgotten how to be happy. Success is what matters." "Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, you look pretty miserable despite all this." He gestured around her luxurious office, with its panoramic views and expensive furniture. "What's the point of building an empire if you're alone in it?" Clara wanted to snap at him, to defend her choices and her life, but the words stuck in her throat. Because Marcus was right, wasn't he? She'd spent years building walls around herself, measuring worth only in achievements and acquisitions, and for what? So she could sit in this office feeling empty while people suffered in the streets below? "I saw something last night," she heard herself say. "Something that changed how I see things." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "That's unusually cryptic for you. Want to elaborate?" Clara found herself telling him about Ethan, about the ladle, about the people living under the overpass. Not everything. She was careful not to implicate Ethan in any specific crimes, but enough to convey the core of what had shaken her so badly. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "So what are you going to do about it?" he finally asked. "I don't know. That's the problem. The logical thing would be to fire him, report the theft, protect the company from liability. But Marcus, you should have seen it. This man is saving lives with our discarded supplies. Children are sleeping warmer because of him. People with infected wounds are getting treatment. How do I weigh that against corporate policy?" "You're asking the wrong question," Marcus said. "The question isn't whether to punish him. It's how to help him do it better." "What do you mean?" "Clara, you're a CEO of a logistics company. You move supplies all over the world every day. If anyone could build a system to get resources to people who need them, it's you." He spread his hands. "Why does it have to be either or? Fire him or ignore the theft? Why can't you create something new?" "Like what?" "I don't know. A charity arm of the company? A partnership with existing homeless services? Use your business brain to solve this like a business problem." Marcus stood, heading for the door. "And maybe in the process, you'll remember that business is supposed to serve people, not the other way around." After he left, Clara sat at her desk staring at nothing. Marcus had planted a seed, but she had no idea how to make it grow. She pulled up files on corporate charitable foundations, tax structures for nonprofits, legal frameworks for donating surplus inventory. The more she read, the more complicated it became. Regulations, oversight committees, liability clauses, a maze of bureaucracy that would take months to navigate. And she had a week before Gavin's audit exposed everything. For the next 3 days, Clara threw herself into research with the same intensity she'd once applied to building her company. She took meetings with lawyers and accountants. She studied models from other corporations with charitable arms. She ran numbers until her eyes burned, trying to find a way to make it work within the existing system. But every path led to the same conclusion. Legitimizing what Ethan was doing would take time they didn't have, and resources that would require board approval. And the board would want cost-benefit analyses, return on investment projections, brand enhancement metrics. They'd turn human suffering into a line item and probably decide it wasn't worth the trouble. On the fourth night, Clara found herself back under the overpass. She told herself she was just checking on things, making sure Ethan was following her instructions to take time off. But really, she needed to see it again, needed to confirm that her memory of that night hadn't been exaggerated by exhaustion and emotion. It hadn't been. If anything, the reality was harder in the stark light of her returning awareness. Curtis greeted her with a knowing nod, as if he'd expected her to come back. Rosie ran up to ask where Mr. Rowe was, and Clara had to explain he was taking a few days off with his daughter. "Will he come back?" the little girl asked, worry creasing her young face. "Yes," Clara promised, hoping it was true. "He'll come back." She spent 2 hours there, and this time she didn't just observe. She participated. She helped distribute food that Curtis and others had pooled money to buy. She sat with Mrs. Chenin, learned the old woman had been a seamstress in China, had immigrated with dreams of a better life, had watched those dreams crumble when her son couldn't make it in America's ruthless economy. She listened to Tommy talk about his time as an engineer before his mind betrayed him. She held a baby while her mother, not much older than a child herself, tried to fix a broken tent zipper with shaking hands. These weren't statistics. They were people with stories, with talents, with worth that had nothing to do with their bank accounts or their productivity. The system had failed them in 1,000 different ways, and now they survived in the gaps, helping each other because no one else would. Clara was taking a break, sitting on a milk crate and drinking terrible coffee from a thermos someone had shared, when Curtis sat down beside her. "You're wrestling with something," he observed. "I can see it on your face." "How do you fix something this big?" Clara asked. "One person with stolen supplies isn't enough. But the system is so broken, so complicated. Where do you even start?" "You start where you are," Curtis said simply, "with what you have." "You think Mr. Rowe had some master plan when he started?" "No. He just saw someone bleeding and pulled out his first aid kit. Then he came back the next night, and the next. The ladle didn't come from some grand design, it grew from one small act of giving a damn. But I'm in a position to do more than one small act. I should be able to— Should. Curtis shook his head. That word will paralyze you. Should implies there's a perfect solution if you just think hard enough. But there isn't. There's just doing what you can with what you got right now and hoping it makes enough difference to matter. Clara thought about that as she drove home to her expensive apartment in the early morning hours. Her penthouse felt obscenely large after the cramped tents under the overpass. The silence felt oppressive after the constant noise of the highway and humanity. She stood at her floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering city, and felt utterly alone. The next morning, she was reviewing supply chain logistics when her assistant buzzed. "Miss Wells, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent. His name is Ethan Rowe." Claire's pulse jumped. "Send him in." Ethan entered looking uncomfortable in civilian clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt instead of his uniform. He held a baseball cap in his hands, turning it nervously. "Mr. Rowe, I told you to take time off." "I know, but I need to talk to you." He glanced around the office, taking in the obvious wealth and power it represented. "This is quite a place. What can I do for you?" "I'm turning myself in." The words came out flat, final. "I'm going to the police today and confessing to the theft. I wanted to tell you first, in case you needed to prepare a statement or whatever companies do in situations like this." Clara stood abruptly. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's the right thing to do. I broke the law. I knew the consequences when I started." Ethan met her eyes steadily. "But I'm going to ask the judge to consider community service instead of jail time. And I'm going to see if I can find some way to keep the ladle running without stolen goods. Maybe fundraising? I don't know. I'll figure it out." "This is ridiculous. You'll destroy your life, your daughter's stability?" "My daughter's stability is already destroyed if I'm living with this guilt. Emma, she deserves a father who does the right thing, even when it's hard." His voice softened. "Sarah would want me to face this honestly, not to hide or run, to stand up and take responsibility." Clara felt something crack in her chest. Here was a man willing to sacrifice everything, his job, his freedom, his daughter's security, because his moral compass pointed true north even when it cost him everything. How many people in her boardroom could say the same? How many times had she herself compromised or rationalized or looked the other way when it benefited her bottom line? "Don't," she said. Don't turn yourself in. Not yet. Ms. Wells equal Clara. And I'm not asking. I'm telling you. Give me until the end of the week. If I haven't figured out a solution by then, you can make whatever confession you want. But I'm not letting you throw yourself on a sword when there might be another way. Ethan studied her for a long moment. Why are you doing this? Because you're right. About all of it. The system is broken. People are suffering, and maybe I can't fix everything, but I can start where I am with what I have, just like Curtis said. She came around her desk to stand in front of him. You showed me something I needed to see. Now, let me try to do something about it. The audit? I know about the audit. That's why I need this week. Clara felt her mind starting to work again, pieces clicking into place the way they did when she was solving a complex business problem. Go back to the ladle. Keep doing what you're doing, and trust me to handle this. After Ethan left, Clara pulled out her phone and made a call she'd been avoiding for 3 years. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Clara, is that you? Hi, Mom. I need your help. Her mother lived in Connecticut now, had remarried someone kind and boring after the chaos of her marriage to Clara's father. They spoke maybe twice a year, awkward conversations laden with unspoken recriminations. But Linda Wells had spent 30 years in nonprofit work, had connections throughout the charitable sector, knew how to navigate the Byzantine world of social services. I need to set up a foundation, Clara said without preamble. Fast. And I need it to actually work, not just be a tax shelter. Can you help me? There was a long pause. Then, what happened to you? I had my eyes opened. Are you going to help or not? Of course I'll help. Tell me what you need. For the next hour, Clara and her mother talked strategy. Linda knew people who could expedite the paperwork, lawyers who specialized in charitable foundations, accountants who could structure it to maximize impact while protecting the parent company from liability. It would still take time, months probably, but Linda thought she could get a temporary operating framework in place within weeks if they pushed hard enough. This is going to be expensive, Linda warned. Initial funding, operational costs, liability insurance, are you prepared for that? I'll find the money. Clara was already mentally reviewing her options. She had personal savings, her Christmas bonus. She could probably leverage some discretionary corporate funds if she was creative with the accounting. Clara, her mother's voice softened. I'm proud of you for doing this. Your father would be too. The words hit harder than expected. Clara had spent so many years trying to succeed where her father had failed, trying to prove she was stronger, smarter, more disciplined. But maybe the real success wasn't in building an empire. It was in remembering to be human while doing it. Thanks, Mom. I'll call you tomorrow with more details. She hung up and immediately started making lists. Legal team, accounting review, board presentation strategy. She'd need to get buy-in from key stakeholders, frame this as a brand enhancement opportunity, make them see the value in corporate social responsibility. It was manipulation. But it was manipulation in service of something good, and Clara was willing to live with that compromise. She was so focused on her planning that she didn't notice Gavin enter her office until he was standing directly in front of her desk. Working hard? He asked, that oily smile in place. Clara minimized her screens. Always. What can I do for you? I wanted to give you a heads up about the audit. I've moved it up to tomorrow. Her blood went cold. Tomorrow? Why? Found some more irregularities. Thought it best to address them sooner rather than later. Gavin tilted his head, studying her reaction. Unless there's a problem with that? Clara forced herself to breathe normally, to keep her expression neutral. No problem, though I'm curious why you didn't run this schedule change past me first. It's an operational audit, not a strategic initiative. Didn't think CEO sign-off was necessary. His smile widened fractionally. But if you want to be there, you're welcome to join us. We're starting at 6 a.m. before the day shift arrives. Figured it would be less disruptive that way. I'll be there. After he left, Clara sat very still, her mind racing. Tomorrow. The audit was tomorrow. She had less than 24 hours to figure out a solution, and even with her mother's help, there was no way to get a foundation established that quickly. Ethan would be exposed. The ladle would be shut down. 40 people would lose the one safety net they had, unless she did something drastic. Clara pulled up the inventory records, studying the pattern of missing supplies. Then she cross-referenced them with Gavin's own access logs and movement patterns. He'd asked her to review operational expenses, claimed he'd found irregularities. But what if there were other irregularities he didn't want discovered? She spent the next 6 hours digging through records, following digital paper trails, looking for anything that didn't add up. Gavin was her CFO, had access to everything, had been with the company for years. If he was hiding something, he'd hidden it well. But everyone made mistakes. Even careful people left traces. It was after midnight when Clara found it. A series of small transfers, each too minor to trigger automatic oversight, but adding up to significant amounts over time. Money moving from operational accounts into what appeared to be legitimate vendor payments. Except when she checked the vendor registrations, several of them were shell corporations registered to addresses that didn't exist. Gavin had been embezzling, for years by the looks of it, probably since before Clara had taken over as CEO. Small amounts, carefully hidden, but definitely theft. And not theft to feed homeless children, theft to line his own pockets. Clara sat back in her chair, her heart pounding. This was the leverage she needed, proof that Gavin wasn't the righteous auditor he pretended to be. He was a criminal worried about getting caught. The audit wasn't about company oversight. It was about deflecting attention from his own crimes by exposing Ethan's. But using this information meant making a choice. She could expose Gavin, save Ethan, and potentially destabilize her entire company's financial leadership. Or she could stay silent, let the audit proceed, and sacrifice the ladle to maintain stability. The old Clara would have run a cost-benefit analysis, would have calculated which choice cost less, and made that decision without sentiment. But the old Clara had never held a homeless baby or watched a schizophrenic man cry because the voices wouldn't stop or listened to Rosie talk about her dreams of becoming a teacher someday. The old Clara had never learned that some things couldn't be reduced to numbers. She picked up her phone and called her head of security. "Jack, it's Clara Wells. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to be very quiet about it." By 3 a.m., Clara had a plan. It was risky, possibly illegal in ways she hadn't fully calculated, and absolutely the right thing to do. She'd spent her whole life playing it safe, following rules, trusting systems. And where had it gotten her? To a place where men like Gavin could steal with impunity, while men like Ethan faced prosecution for saving lives. Time to change the rules. She drove to the overpass one more time, finding Curtis awake and keeping watch while others slept. "Something's happening," she told him. "Tomorrow, I need you to make sure everyone stays away from here during the day. Can you do that?" "How long?" 24 hours. After that, either everything will be different or everything will be over." Curtis studied her in the dim light. "You're taking a big risk, aren't you? The biggest of my life." "Good," he smiled. "About time someone with power decided to risk something for people without it." Clara drove back to her apartment as dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. She showered, dressed in her most severe power suit, armor for the battle ahead, and arrived at her office at 5:30 a.m. Gavin was already there, along with 2 auditors Clara didn't recognize, and her head of security, Jack. She'd briefed Jack on what she'd found, shown him the evidence, and watched his face go from confusion to anger. Jack had served in the military with Ethan years ago, it turned out. One more connection in the web of human relationships that Clara had spent so long ignoring. "Shall we head down?" Gavin said cheerfully, gesturing toward the elevator. "Actually," Clara said, her voice cold and clear, "I think we need to have a different conversation first. In my office. All of you." She turned and walked away without waiting for a response, trusting they would follow. Power meant knowing when to command and when to request. Right now, this was a command. In her office, Clara positioned herself behind her desk while the others filed in. Gavin still wore that practiced smile, but she caught a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "There's been a change of plans," Clara announced. "The audit is canceled." "Canceled?" Gavin's smile faltered. "Clara, we discussed this, and now I'm undiscussing it." She opened her laptop, turned it so the screen faced him. "What I'd like to discuss instead is this pattern of transfers, the ones going to non-existent vendors, the ones that amount to roughly $400,000 over the past 5 years. The color drained from Gavin's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really? Because I have documentation, financial records, shell company registrations with your signature. Clara kept her voice level, professional, deadly. I have enough evidence to send you to prison for a very long time, Gavin. One of the auditors stepped forward. Miss Wells, if you have evidence of financial crimes, I do, and I'm prepared to turn it over to the authorities. But first, I wanted to give Mr. Cross an opportunity to resign. Quietly. With a written confession and agreement to repay every dollar he stole, with interest. In exchange, I won't press charges. Gavin's face had gone from pale to red. You're bluffing. You have nothing. Clara pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk. These are copies. The originals are with my lawyer, along with instructions to turn them over to the DA if anything happens to me or if you refuse this deal. She leaned forward. You wanted an audit, Gavin. You got one, just not the one you planned. The silence in the room was absolute. Clara could see the calculation happening behind Gavin's eyes, weighing his options, looking for an angle, trying to find a way out. But she'd learned from the best. Gavin himself had taught her how to corner an opponent and leave them no room to maneuver. Finally, his shoulders sagged. What do you want? Your resignation, today. Full repayment over the next 10 years. And your silence about any irregularities you may have noticed in company inventory. Clara's voice hardened. Because here's the thing, Gavin. Those supplies you were so concerned about, they were being used to save lives, to feed children and treat wounds and keep people from freezing to death on the streets. If you'd succeeded in exposing that operation, you would have hurt the most vulnerable people in this city, and I'm not going to let that happen. You're protecting a thief. I'm protecting humanity. Something you clearly know nothing about. She stood. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal items. You have 2 hours to be out of this building. And Gavin, if I ever hear that you've said one word about what you saw in those inventory reports, our deal is off and you go to prison. Are we clear? He stared at her with naked hatred, but he nodded. After security led him away, Clara sat down heavily in her chair. Her hands were shaking with adrenaline and something that might have been fear. She'd just ended a man's career, leveraged evidence in ways that probably violated a dozen employment laws, and potentially exposed herself to massive liability. She'd also just saved the ladle, saved Ethan, saved 40 people who would otherwise have lost their only lifeline. Her phone rang. Ethan. Clara? His voice was tight with tension. What's happening? Security just came to the ladle, asking everyone to clear out for the day. They mentioned your name. It's okay, Clara said. It's more than okay. Can you meet me at my office in an hour? What did you do? What needed to be done? Just trust me. 1 more hour, and then I'll explain everything. She ended the call and looked out at the Manhattan skyline, no longer seeing monuments to inequality, but possibilities for change. She still had her mother's call to make. Legal frameworks to establish, a board to convince. She had months of work ahead of her to legitimize what Ethan had started. But for the first time since that night in the storage room, Clara felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. She felt human. Ethan arrived exactly 1 hour later, still wearing those civilian clothes that made him look younger somehow, less burdened. Clara's assistant showed him in, and Clara noticed the way the young woman's eyes lingered on him with curiosity. Word had already spread through the building that something significant had happened with Gavin's abrupt departure. Corporate gossip moved faster than any memo. Sit down, Clara said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. We have a lot to talk about. Ethan sat but remained perched on the edge of the seat, tension radiating from every line of his body. Security cleared everyone out of the ladle. They were professional about it, didn't hurt anyone. But Clara, those people have nowhere else to go. Curtis said you told him to keep everyone away for 24 hours, but after that they can come back, Clara interrupted. And when they do, things are going to be different. Better. She took a breath, organizing her thoughts. Gavin's gone. He resigned this morning. Ethan's eyes widened. What? Why? Because he was embezzling from the company. Had been for years. Clara opened her laptop, showed him the evidence she'd compiled. I found it last night. When I confronted him this morning, he had no choice but to resign. You did this because of the ladle. I did this because it was right. The audit was never about company oversight. It was about Gavin covering his own crimes by exposing yours. Clara closed the laptop. He wanted to make you the villain so no one would look closely at his own activities. Ethan sat back slowly, processing. So, the ladle is safe? For now. But Ethan, we can't keep operating the way we have been. What you built is incredible, but it's not sustainable. We need to legitimize it, create a real framework that can grow and actually solve problems instead of just putting band-aids on them. How? Clara spent the next 20 minutes laying out the plan she'd developed with her mother. A charitable foundation funded initially by Clara's personal money and discretionary corporate funds, with a mission focused on immediate intervention for homeless populations. Not just food and blankets, but medical care, job training, temporary housing assistance. The ladle would become the pilot program, the proof of concept that could be expanded citywide if it worked. It's going to take time to set up properly, Clara admitted. Months, probably. But my mother knows people who can expedite the process. In the meantime, I'm authorizing you to take what you need from company supplies. Officially this time. Consider it a temporary corporate donation while we get the paperwork sorted. Ethan was shaking his head before she finished. Clara, I can't ask you to do this. Your personal money, your company's resources, you're not asking. I'm offering. She leaned forward. You showed me something I'd been deliberately ignoring. People suffering while I counted profits. Children sleeping in the cold while I worried about quarterly margins. I can't unknow what I know now. And I have resources, real resources, not just stolen supplies. It would be criminal for me not to use them. The board will never approve this. I'm not giving them a choice. I control 51% of the voting shares. My father made sure of that before he died. Clara's voice hardened with determination. This company is mine, and I'm using it to do something that matters. If the board doesn't like it, they can quit. I'll find people who actually give a damn about more than stock prices. Ethan studied her for a long moment, and Clara saw something shift in his expression, surprise giving way to respect, then to something warmer that made her look away. Your father would be proud, he said quietly. What you're doing here. It takes courage. My father killed himself because he thought business success was all that mattered. That if he couldn't maintain his empire, his life had no value. Clara's throat tightened. I spent years trying to prove I was stronger than him, that I wouldn't make his mistakes, but I was making different mistakes, building walls instead of bridges, counting money instead of measuring impact. You helped me see that. I didn't do anything except steal from you. You did everything. Clara stood, moving to the window where Manhattan sprawled below them in all its contradictory glory. You reminded me that numbers are just abstractions, that behind every statistic is a human being with a story, that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. Ethan joined her at the window, standing close enough that she could smell the laundry detergent on his shirt and something else, soap and coffee and the faint antiseptic smell that seemed to follow him everywhere. So what happens now? Now we build something real, together. Clara turned to face him. I want you to run the foundation once it's established. You know these communities, you understand their needs, you've already built trust. I can provide resources and organizational structure, but this has to be led by someone who actually cares, not some professional administrator who sees it as a resume line. I'm a janitor with a high school diploma. You're a combat medic who built a functional support network from nothing. You're exactly who should be running this. Clara felt herself smile for the first time in days. Besides, I'll handle the bureaucracy and fundraising. You just focus on the people. What about Emma, my daughter? I can't neglect her for this. We'll structure it so you have flexibility. Regular hours, benefits, actual support staff, so you're not doing everything alone. Clara had already thought through the logistics. Your daughter needs her father, and the foundation needs you. We can make both work. Ethan was quiet for so long that Clara started to worry she'd pushed too hard, asked too much. Then he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah always said I needed to think bigger, that I had the capacity to make real change, but I was holding myself back. I never believed her, but maybe she was right. She was definitely right. Clara extended her hand. So is this a yes? Ethan took her hand, his grip warm and calloused and solid. It's a yes, but on one condition. I want the people at the ladle involved in decision-making, not just recipients of charity, but actual partners. They know what they need better than any administrator ever could. Agreed. We'll set up an advisory council. Curtis should definitely be on it. They were still shaking hands when Clara's assistant buzzed in. Ms. Wells, your mother is on line 1. She says it's urgent. Clara picked up this call, putting it on speaker. Mom, you're on speaker with Ethan Rowe. What's going on? Linda Wells's voice came through crisp and energized in a way Clara hadn't heard in years. I've been making calls all morning. I have a law firm willing to do the incorporation pro bono if we agree to let them use it as a case study. I have an accountant who specializes in charitable foundations who can start immediately. And I have 3 major donors who are interested in contributing once we're established. Apparently word is already spreading about what you're trying to do. How is word spreading? We literally decided this yesterday. Marcus posted something on social media about his sister finally doing something meaningful with her life. It went somewhat viral. Linda's tone was amused. Apparently people are interested in CEOs who actually care about social impact. Who knew? Clara closed her eyes. Of course Marcus had posted something. Her brother couldn't keep a secret if his life depended on it. How bad is it? Bad? Clara, it's wonderful. You're getting genuine positive attention. The business press is calling you a pioneer in corporate social responsibility. One article called you the CEO with a conscience. That's going to make the board meeting interesting, Clara muttered. Embrace it, Linda advised. This is the kind of narrative that can transform a company's brand, and more importantly, it might inspire other corporations to do the same. You're not just helping one homeless camp, you're potentially starting a movement. After the call ended, Clara pulled up her brother's social media on her computer. Sure enough, there was Marcus with a photo of her from some charity gala, accompanied by a long caption about how his sister was using her company's resources to help the homeless, and how proud he was of her evolution from corporate robot to actual human being. It had thousands of shares and comments, most of them positive. Well, Clara said, I guess we're doing this publicly now. Is that a problem? Ethan asked. It means I can't back down even if I wanted to, which I guess is appropriate. If I'm asking you to be all in, I should be all in too. Clara took a deep breath. Okay, new plan. We're holding a press conference in 3 days. We announce the foundation, explain the mission, and we do it from the ladle. Let people see the reality of what we're addressing. You want to bring press to the overpass? I want transparency. I want people to understand this isn't some abstract charity. It's about real people with real needs. And I want everyone who's been ignoring the problem to have to look it in the eye. Ethan smiled and it transformed his entire face. You really have changed, haven't you? I'm trying to. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked away. Go back to the ladle. Tell everyone it's safe to return. Tell them help is coming. Real, sustained help. And Ethan, tell them thank you for teaching me how to be human again. Over the next 3 days, Clara barely slept. She worked with her mother and the pro bono legal team to draft incorporation documents. She met with her board in an emergency session that was every bit as contentious as she'd anticipated. 3 board members threatened to resign. Clara told them she'd have their replacement candidates ready by the end of the week. This is corporate suicide, one board member warned. Shareholders are going to revolt. The shareholders can vote me out if they want, Clara replied coolly. But I control enough shares that they'll have to work pretty hard at it. And frankly, if our investors are more concerned with quarterly dividends than with the fact that children are sleeping on the streets, I don't want their money anyway. She won the vote, barely, and walked out of that boardroom feeling simultaneously exhausted and more alive than she had in years. The press conference was scheduled for Thursday evening at 6 p.m., time to catch the evening news cycle. Clara's PR team wanted to hold it at the office, or at least at a hotel. Clara insisted on the ladle itself. She wanted the cameras to see the tents, the people, the reality of what they were addressing. The day of the conference, Clara dressed carefully in a simple black suit, professional but not ostentatious. She drove to the overpass alone, arriving 2 hours early to help with setup. The space had been transformed. Someone, probably Curtis, had organized a cleaning campaign. The area was still clearly a homeless encampment, but it was orderly, dignified. A small platform had been erected for Clara to speak from, with microphones and lights provided by the news crews who were already beginning to arrive. Curtis approached as Clara stepped out of her car. "Ready for this?" "No," Clara admitted. "Terrified, actually." "Good. Means you're taking it seriously." Curtis handed her a cup of coffee. Real coffee, still hot. "The folks here, they want to thank you, but they're also skeptical. They've been promised help before, had their hopes raised and then crushed. So when you talk tonight, talk straight. No corporate nonsense, just the truth." "I can do that." Ethan appeared with his daughter Emma, a small girl with her father's gray eyes and a smile that reminded Clara painfully of Sarah from the photos Ethan had shown her. Emma was carrying a handmade sign that read, "Thank you, Ms. Clara," in crayon, decorated with flowers and hearts. "Emma wanted to be here," Ethan explained. "I told her what you're doing. She wanted to help." Clara knelt down to Emma's level. "That's a beautiful sign. Thank you." "Daddy says you're going to help his friends," Emma said seriously. "That's nice. Daddy's friends are good people. They really are. Your father taught me that." As 6 p.m. approached, the area filled with cameras and reporters. Clara's PR director was managing the press pool, but Clara could see the journalists' faces as they took in the scene, the tents, the people, the children. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked angry, as if seeing this poverty in the heart of wealthy Manhattan was a personal affront. Clara stepped up to the microphone at exactly 6 p.m. The camera lights were blinding, but beyond them she could see the faces of the people from the ladle, Curtis and Rosie and Mrs. Chen and Tommy and dozens of others. Real people whose lives would be affected by what happened next. "Good evening," Clara began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My name is Clara Wells, and I'm the CEO of Wells Logistics. 3 weeks ago, I discovered that one of my employees was stealing from my company. His name is Ethan Rowe, and he's standing right over there." She pointed. Cameras swiveled to capture Ethan, who stood with his daughter's hand in his, meeting the press's gaze without flinching. Mr. Rowe was taking supplies, blankets, medical equipment, food, and bringing them here to this encampment under the West Side overpass. By every legal definition, he was a thief. I could have fired him. I could have pressed charges. Instead, I decided to follow him one night and see where the stolen goods were going. Clara paused, letting her gaze sweep across the cameras and the people beyond them. "What I found changed my life. I found 40 human beings living in conditions that should be impossible in one of the wealthiest cities in the world. I found children sleeping in cardboard boxes. I found elderly people choosing between food and medicine. I found veterans suffering from PTSD with nowhere to turn. I found people who had jobs and homes until one medical emergency, one layoff, one stroke of bad luck knocked them into poverty. They couldn't escape." Someone in the press pool shouted a question, but Clara kept going. "Mr. Rowe wasn't stealing, he was saving lives. And he was doing it because the systems that are supposed to help these people have failed. The shelters are full. The waiting lists are months or years long. The bureaucracy is so complex that people who are struggling just to survive can't navigate it, so they end up here, forgotten by a city that would rather pretend they don't exist." Clara felt her voice strengthen, felt anger and passion replacing nervousness. "Well, I can't pretend anymore, and I'm not going to. Tonight, I'm announcing the creation of the Wells Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to immediate intervention for homeless populations. We're starting here at the Ladle, the community that Mr. Rowe and these incredible people built together. We're going to provide medical care, job training, temporary housing assistance, and most importantly, we're going to treat people with the dignity they deserve." The questions came rapid fire then, journalists shouting over each other. Clara's PR director tried to organize them, but Clara waved her off. "Yes, the woman in the red jacket." "Ms. Wells, are you condoning theft? Doesn't that send a dangerous message?" "What sends a dangerous message is a society that values property more than people," Clara replied. "Mr. Rowe made a choice between following the law and saving lives. I'm not saying everyone should steal. I'm saying we need to fix a system where that choice even has to be made. The fact that stealing was the most effective way to help people should horrify us all. Are you planning to reimburse the company for the stolen goods? The foundation will formally acquire all remaining donated supplies through proper channels. And frankly, the value of what Mr. Rowe took is less than what I spend on office furniture in a quarter. If we're going to talk about theft, let's talk about the theft of human dignity, the theft of opportunity, the theft of hope that happens when we ignore suffering because it's inconvenient. Another reporter, this one from a conservative business network. Ms. Wells, some are saying this is a publicity stunt, that you're using the homeless as props to boost your company's image. How do you respond? Before Clara could answer, Curtis stepped up to the microphone beside her. Clara started to protest, but he shook his head. I'm Curtis Jackson, he said into the microphone, his deep voice carrying authority. I've lived here for 3 years. I'm what this lady calls unofficial mayor of this community. And I'm here to tell you, this ain't no publicity stunt. Ms. Wells came down here in the middle of the night not knowing if she'd be safe. She served soup, she held babies, she listened to our stories, and then she went back to her fancy office and put her career on the line to help us. So before y'all start making accusations, maybe think about what you've done to help lately. The crowd of journalists went quiet. Then Rosie's mother stepped forward, holding her daughter's hand. My name is Ana Martinez, she said in accented English, her voice shaking but determined. I came to this country with my daughter to escape violence. I worked hard, I followed the rules, but when I lost my job, I lost everything. Mr. Rowe, he made sure my daughter had food, had medicine when she was sick. He treated us like human beings when everyone else treated us like we were invisible. Ms. Wells, she's trying to make sure other people don't have to go through what we went through. That's not a publicity stunt, that's called caring. One by one, people from the ladle stepped forward to share their stories. Mrs. Chen talking about being abandoned by a system that didn't care about elderly immigrants. Tommy talking about his mental illness and how Ethan's kindness was the only thing that kept him from killing himself. A young veteran explaining how he'd gone from serving his country to sleeping under a bridge because the VA couldn't process his claims fast enough. Clara stood back and let them speak. Let the cameras capture their faces and their pain and their resilience. This was what she'd wanted, not to make herself look good, but to make these people visible, to force the city, the country, to acknowledge that these weren't statistics or policy abstractions. They were human beings who deserved better. The press conference lasted for over an hour. By the end, even the most skeptical journalists seemed moved. Clara saw one camera operator wiping tears from his eyes as he filmed. As the news crews packed up their equipment, Clara found herself surrounded by people from the ladle, all wanting to thank her, to shake her hand, to tell her what this meant. Emma presented Clara with her crayon sign, and Clara accepted it with a lump in her throat. You really think you can change things? A voice asked. Clara turned to find a young man, maybe 25, with prison tattoos and wary eyes. Because I've heard a lot of promises. They never amount to nothing. I can't promise to fix everything, Clara said honestly. But I can promise to try, and I can promise that I'm not going anywhere. This isn't a one-time thing. This is a commitment. We'll see, the young man said, but he was almost smiling as he walked away. Ethan approached as the crowd dispersed. That was incredible. The way you spoke, people are going to pay attention. They'd better, because I meant every word. Clara looked around at the encampment, at the faces of people who were beginning to hope again. We're going to do this right, Ethan. We're going to build something that actually works. I know we will. He hesitated, then added, Emma asked if you'd like to have dinner with us sometime. Nothing fancy, just pizza at our apartment. She wants to show you her room and her drawings. Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest. I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. She drove home that night exhausted but energized, checking her phone to find it flooded with messages. Her brother congratulating her, her mother crying proud tears over voicemail, board members who'd opposed her now sending cautiously supportive emails, and hundreds of messages from strangers, people wanting to donate, to volunteer, to help. The news coverage that night was overwhelmingly positive. Clara watched herself on multiple channels, saw the faces of the people from the ladle, heard their stories being told to millions of viewers. One political commentator called it the most human moment in corporate America this decade. Another suggested Clara should run for mayor. But the message that meant the most came from an unknown number, just 3 words. Thank you, Curtis. Clara fell asleep that night, not in her expensive bed, but on her couch, still wearing her suit, her phone clutched in her hand and Emma's crayon sign propped against the wall where she could see it. For the first time in years, she didn't dream about failure or her father's death or the endless pursuit of success that never quite satisfied. She dreamed about possibility, about change, about a world where people like Rosie and Tommy and Mrs. Chen didn't have to survive in the cracks, but could thrive in the light. And when she woke the next morning to dozens of missed calls and her assistant frantically texting that the foundation website had crashed from too much traffic and donations were pouring in faster than they could process them, Clara smiled. Because this was just the beginning. The foundation website crashing felt like a good problem to have, Clara thought, as she stood in the shower letting hot water pound against her shoulders. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Reporters requesting follow-up interviews, corporate leaders wanting to discuss partnerships, individuals offering everything from money to volunteer hours. The world, it seemed, had been waiting for someone to acknowledge that success and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. By the time Clara reached her office at 7 a.m., her assistant had already compiled a list of the most urgent calls. The number at the top made Clara's breath catch. A billionaire philanthropist known for reshaping entire sectors with his donations wanted to discuss significant financial support for the Wells Foundation. He called personally at 6:30 this morning, her assistant said, eyes wide. Said he watched the press conference 3 times and wants to meet today if possible. Set it up, Clara said, already mentally adjusting her schedule. And get me everything we have on his other charitable ventures. I want to know what he responds to. The morning blurred into a series of high-stakes conversations. The billionaire, a tech mogul named Richard Chen, who'd made his fortune in software, met her for coffee at 8 and pledged $5 million on the spot. My mother lived on the streets for 6 months after my father died, he explained, his voice tight with old pain. I was too young to help her then. This is my chance to help someone else's mother. By noon, the foundation had received over $300,000 in individual donations, most of them small amounts, $20 here, $50 there, from people who'd watched the news coverage and wanted to contribute. Clara found herself moved to tears by the messages that accompanied them. This is my grocery money for the week, but those kids need it more. I was homeless once. Someone helped me, paying it forward. Finally, a CEO who gets it. But the message that hit hardest came through her personal email, forwarded from someone who'd tracked down her address. The subject line read simply, "From Tommy." Clara opened it with shaking hands. The email was clearly written by someone else. The grammar and spelling were too clean to be Tommy's own work. But the words were unmistakably his. Dear Ms. Clara, Curtis helped me write this because my hands shake too much. I wanted to say thank you for seeing me. Most people look right through me like I'm a ghost. You looked at me like I'm a person. The medicine you gave helped quiet the voices. I slept through the night for the first time in months. I don't know if I'll ever be okay again, but for the first time in a long time, I have hope. Thank you for giving me that. Your friend, Tommy. Clara sat at her desk and cried. Ugly, shoulder-shaking sobs that she didn't try to hide when her assistant walked in with more messages. The young woman simply set down the papers, squeezed Clara's shoulder, and quietly left. By the end of that first week, the Wells Foundation had raised over $8 million and had a waiting list of volunteers longer than Clara could process. Her mother had assembled a team of experienced nonprofit administrators to handle the operational logistics. Ethan had officially accepted the position of executive director and was working with Curtis and others from the Ladle to build the advisory council. And Clara had fielded calls from 3 other Fortune 500 CEOs interested in creating similar programs in their own cities. You've started something, her brother Marcus said when he stopped by the office Friday evening. He looked around at the boxes of donated supplies, the whiteboards covered in organizational charts, the organized chaos of a movement being born. This is bigger than the Ladle now. This is national. I just wanted to help 40 people under an overpass, Clara said, feeling overwhelmed. Yeah, well, you're going to help a lot more than that. Hope you're ready. Marcus hugged her, a rare gesture between them, and whispered, Dad would be so proud. I know I am. After he left, Clara stood at her office window watching the sun set over Manhattan. The city looked different now, or maybe she looked at it differently. Either way, she could no longer see those glittering towers without thinking about the shadows between them, the people surviving in the gaps. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Dinner at my place? Emma's been asking all week. She made you something." Clara smiled and typed back, "I'll bring dessert." "What does she like?" "Chocolate. Anything chocolate. See you at 7. Ethan's apartment was in Queens, a modest two-bedroom in a building that had seen better decades. The elevator was broken, so Clara climbed 5 flights of stairs carrying a chocolate cake from the bakery near her office. She was breathing hard when she knocked, her expensive heels not designed for that kind of exertion. Emma answered the door, her face lighting up. "Ms. Clara, you came! Did you bring the dessert? Daddy said you might bring dessert." "Emma, let her in first," Ethan called from somewhere inside. He appeared in the doorway, wearing jeans and a sweater, his hair still damp from the shower. Clara felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with climbing stairs. The apartment was small but immaculate, decorated with obvious care. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator. Photos of Sarah were displayed prominently, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and Emma's smile. The living room held more books than furniture, and everything smelled like garlic and tomatoes. "I made spaghetti," Ethan said, taking the cake box from her. "It's pretty much the only thing I can cook that Emma will actually eat." "I'll eat other things," Emma protested, "just not vegetables." "Vegetables are part of other things. Carrots don't count as vegetables. They're just crunchy orange sticks." Clara laughed. Feeling tension she didn't know she'd been carrying dissolve in the warmth of their banter. This was so different from her sterile apartment, from the high-powered dinners she usually attended where every word was calculated and every smile had an agenda. This was real. This was family. Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Emma talked nonstop about her day at school, about her best friend who had a hamster, about the drawing she'd made for Clara that was currently hidden in her room because it was a surprise. Ethan interjected occasionally to correct obvious exaggerations. No, Emma's teacher did not actually say she was the smartest student ever, just that her essay was very good. But mostly he just watched his daughter with such profound love that Clara felt like she was intruding on something sacred. "Do you have kids?" Emma asked suddenly, fixing Clara with those serious gray eyes. "Emma?" Ethan said warningly. "What? It's just a question." "No," Clara answered honestly. "I don't. I always thought maybe someday, but I was too busy building my company." "Do you wish you had them? Kids, I mean?" Clara considered this. A year ago, she would have said no automatically, would have cited the statistics about how children impacted career progression and productivity. But now, sitting in this cramped kitchen, watching Emma's animated face and Ethan's gentle presence, she found herself saying, "Yes, I think I do." "You should have them then," Emma declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. "You'd be a good mom. You help people. That's what good moms do." After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Clara her room. It was a riot of pink and purple, posters of pop stars Clara didn't recognize covering the walls. But what caught Clara's attention was the corner where Emma had created what she called her art studio, a small desk piled with papers, crayons, markers, and half-finished drawings. "This is what I made for you," Emma said, pulling out a large piece of construction paper. Daddy helped with the spelling. The drawing showed stick figures under what was clearly meant to be the overpass. Clara recognized the distinctive shape. There was a figure labeled Mr. Rowe with a stethoscope, another labeled Curtis with a big smile, smaller figures labeled with names Clara recognized from the ladle. And in the center, taller than the others, was a figure in a black dress labeled Ms. Clara, the hero. "I'm not a hero," Clara said, her throat tight. "Yes, you are," Emma insisted. "Heroes are people who help other people even when it's hard. Daddy told me what you did, how you stood up for him and for his friends. That makes you a hero." Clara knelt down to Emma's level, looking into eyes that had seen too much loss for someone so young. "Your daddy is the real hero. I just finally paid attention." "You can both be heroes," Emma said with the logic of a child who didn't understand why adults complicated everything. "There's enough hero to go around." Later, after Emma had been convinced to go to bed despite her protests that she wasn't tired, Claire and Ethan sat in the living room with coffee. The apartment was quiet except for the muted sounds of the city outside and the occasional creak of Emma moving around in her room. "She's amazing," Clara said. You've done an incredible job with her. Sarah did most of it, Ethan replied. I'm just trying not to screw up what she started. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, Do you really regret not having children? I don't know if regret is the right word. More like I'm realizing I made choices based on fear rather than desire. I was so afraid of failing, of being vulnerable, of depending on anyone that I closed myself off from everything except work. Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, feeling its warmth. You lost your wife and somehow stayed open, stayed capable of love and trust and hope. How? Ethan looked at the photos of Sarah on the wall. I didn't have a choice. Emma needed a father who could still feel, still connect. If I'd shut down, I would have lost her too, just in a different way. He turned back to Clara. But it wasn't easy. Some days I wanted to crawl into a hole and never come out. The only thing that saved me was having to show up for her every single day. And then you started showing up for other people too. It turns out helping others is how we save ourselves. Ethan smiled slightly. I learned that from Sarah. She used to volunteer at homeless shelters, food banks, anywhere people needed help. I thought she was crazy. We barely had enough money for ourselves. But she'd say, we have enough. Having more than enough means you have enough to share. After she died, I finally understood what she meant. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that only exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with words. Clara found herself thinking about all the years she'd spent in uncomfortable silences, at business dinners, on awkward dates, in her own apartment where the quiet felt oppressive rather than peaceful. I should go, she said reluctantly, checking her watch. It was almost 11. Stay, Ethan said, then quickly added, I mean, if you want, the couch is comfortable. It's late, and honestly, it's been nice having another adult to talk to. He looked embarrassed. That sounded pathetic. It didn't, Clara assured him, and I'd like to stay if you're sure. Ethan found her blankets and a pillow, apologizing for the lack of guest room amenities. Clara changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt he lent her, both comically large on her frame, and settled onto the couch. She could hear Emma's gentle breathing from the other room, Ethan moving around in his bedroom, the building settling around her. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara felt safe. She woke to the smell of pancakes and Emma's laughter. Morning light streamed through the windows, and for a disoriented moment, Clara couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back. Ethan's apartment, the dinner, the drawing, the decision to stay. In the kitchen, Ethan was flipping pancakes while Emma sat at the table already dressed for her Saturday morning activities. Ms. Clara's awake, Emma announced. Daddy made chocolate chip pancakes because it's the weekend. I hope you're hungry, Ethan said, sliding a plate in front of Clara. Emma insists guests get the first serving. They ate breakfast together, and Clara found herself cataloging details to remember later. The way sunlight hit the kitchen table, the sound of Emma's chatter, the comfortable domesticity of it all. This was what she'd been missing, what no amount of success or money could buy. Connection, belonging, the simple joy of being with people who saw her as more than a title or a bank account. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. Foundation incorporation is complete. You're official as of this morning. Congratulations, darling. Now the real work begins. Clara showed the message to Ethan. We're official. That was fast. My mother has connections I didn't even know about. Apparently she's been waiting for me to do something like this for years. Clara scrolled through the rest of her messages. More donation notifications, interview requests, and one from Curtis. When can we start building? Over the next month, the ladle transformed. With proper funding and organizational support, Ethan and Curtis's informal operation became a sophisticated intervention program. A medical van staffed with volunteer nurses visited 3 times a week. A job training program connected residents with employment opportunities. A partnership with a local law school provided free legal assistance for people dealing with documentation issues, outstanding warrants for minor offenses, or disputes with social services. But the most important change was the housing program. Using a combination of foundation funds and partnerships with local landlords, they began moving families out of the encampment and into temporary apartments. Not shelters, but actual homes with doors that locked, and kitchens that worked and bedrooms where children could sleep without hearing highway traffic overhead. Anna and Rosie were among the first to be housed. Clara was there the day they got their keys, watched Rosie run through the empty two-bedroom apartment squealing with delight, saw Anna cry as she stood in her own kitchen for the first time in 9 months. "I can cook for my daughter," Anna kept saying. "I can cook real food in my own kitchen." Mrs. Chen was next, moving into a senior housing complex where she immediately became the building's unofficial grandmother, teaching other residents how to make dumplings and fussing over everyone like they were family. Tommy was placed in a supportive housing program designed for people with mental illness, where he had his own room but also access to counseling and medication management. The last Clara heard, he'd started painting, abstract works that were beautiful and haunting and somehow hopeful. Not everyone accepted housing. Some preferred the freedom of the streets, didn't trust institutions even when they claimed to help. Clara learned to respect that choice, to keep the ladle operating as a low-barrier service for those who weren't ready or willing to transition. Curtis remained there, choosing to stay even when offered housing, because he said someone needed to be the bridge between the housed and the unhoused, someone who understood both worlds. The media attention continued, though it shifted from feel-good human interest stories to serious policy discussions. Clara found herself testifying before City Council about homeless services, participating in panel discussions about corporate social responsibility, being interviewed by national news programs about the role of business in addressing social problems. She hated most of it, the performative nature of public speaking, the way complex issues got reduced to sound bites, the constant scrutiny of everything she said and did. But she kept doing it because every appearance meant more attention for the cause, more potential donors, more pressure on politicians to actually address the systemic problems that created homelessness in the first place. 6 months after the press conference, Clara was invited to speak at a national business summit in Chicago. The topic was conscious capitalism, profits, and purpose. She almost declined. Her schedule was already overwhelming, but Ethan convinced her to go. "You're not just helping our people anymore," he pointed out. "You're showing other business leaders that this is possible. That's worth a few days away." So Clara found herself standing on a stage in front of 3,000 business executives looking out at a sea of expensive suits and calculating eyes. These were her people, she realized, or they had been. Now she wasn't quite sure where she fit. "A year ago," Clara began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I caught my janitor stealing from my company. By every standard I'd been taught, I should have fired him and pressed charges. Instead, I followed him to see where the stolen goods were going. What I found changed everything I believed about success, about business, about what it means to be human." She told them the story, not the sanitized version her PR team had crafted, but the real story. The shock of seeing the encampment, the guilt of having ignored suffering for so long, the fear of risking her company for people she didn't know, the joy of discovering that doing the right thing felt better than any quarterly profit report ever had. "Here's what I learned," Clara said, leaning into the microphone. "We've been asking the wrong question. The question isn't how much profit can we make. The question is how much good can we do while still being profitable? And the answer is a lot more than we think." She shared the numbers, the foundation's budget, the people housed, the medical interventions, the job placements. But she also shared the things that couldn't be quantified. The way Rosie's face lit up when she talked about starting school, the art Tommy was creating, the fact that Mrs. Chen no longer had to choose between food and her heart medication. "Some of you are thinking this is naive," Clara continued, "that business and charity are separate spheres, that mixing them is inefficient or impractical. But I'm here to tell you that my company is more profitable now than it was before I started the foundation. Employee morale is up. Retention is up. We're attracting top talent who want to work for a company that cares about more than just stock prices. And our brand value has increased by 30%. She paused, looking out at the audience. But even if none of that were true, even if doing this had hurt our bottom line, it would still be worth it. Because at the end of the day, we're not going to be remembered for our profit margins. We're going to be remembered for what we did with our privilege, our resources, our power. We're going to be remembered for whether we helped or whether we looked away." The speech ended with a standing ovation. Afterwards, Clara was surrounded by executives wanting to discuss partnerships, to learn how to replicate the model, to share their own awakening moments. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. On the flight back to New York, Clara stared out the window at clouds that looked solid enough to walk on, and thought about how much had changed. A year ago, she'd been alone in her corner office, measuring her worth in numbers that never quite added up to satisfaction. Now she had purpose. She had community. She had Ethan and Emma and Curtis and all the others who'd taught her that success meant something entirely different than she'd imagined. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Emma made you another drawing. This one's even better. When are you coming for dinner?" Clara smiled and typed back, "Tomorrow? I miss you guys." The response came immediately. "We miss you too." Something warm bloomed in Clara's chest. Over the past months, dinners at Ethan's apartment had become a regular occurrence. Sometimes they talked about the foundation, strategizing and problem solving. But more often they just talked about life. Emma's school activities, books they were reading, memories of people they'd loved and lost. It was comfortable and complicated, and Clara found herself looking forward to those evenings more than anything else in her schedule. She wasn't sure when her feelings for Ethan had shifted from professional respect to something deeper. Maybe it was the night Emma fell asleep between them on the couch during a movie, and Ethan had looked at Clara over his daughter's head with such tenderness that Clara's breath had caught. Maybe it was the day at the ladle when their hands had brushed while serving soup and neither of them had pulled away. Maybe it had been inevitable from the moment she'd watched him tend to that homeless child's wound with such gentle competence. Whatever the catalyst, Clara was now forced to acknowledge a truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with her former janitor, the man who'd stolen from her company and inadvertently stolen her heart in the process. The foundation's one-year anniversary fell on a cold November evening. They'd planned a celebration at the ladle, not a fancy gala, but a community gathering where everyone who'd been part of the journey could come together. Clara arrived early to help set up, finding the space transformed with lights and decorations, tables loaded with food donated by local restaurants. Curtis had organized everything with his usual efficiency. "Year 1 in the books," he said, hugging Clara. "You know what we've accomplished? 73 people housed, 247 receiving regular medical care. 18 people in job training programs, 12 of them already employed. 3 families reunified after being separated by homelessness." He grinned. "Not bad for an operation that started with stolen blankets." People began arriving, former residents of the encampment now living in apartments, volunteers who'd given countless hours, donors who'd contributed everything from money to medical supplies. Anna brought homemade tamales. Mrs. Chen brought dumplings. Someone had a guitar and started playing, and soon the space was filled with music and laughter and the kind of joy that comes from shared struggle and shared triumph. Emma found Clara and pulled her aside conspiratorially. "Daddy has a surprise for you," she whispered. "But I'm not supposed to tell you because it's a secret." "Then you probably shouldn't tell me," Clara said, fighting a smile. "But I want to tell you, it's a good surprise, the best surprise." Emma bounced on her toes. "He's going to ask you something important." Before Clara could respond, Ethan appeared and shooed his daughter away with mock sternness. "Emma Rowe, what did we talk about?" "Not to ruin surprises," Emma sing-songed, skipping away. Ethan shook his head ruefully. "She's terrible at keeping secrets. Gets that from her mother." "What kind of surprise?" Clara asked, her heart suddenly racing. "You'll see." Ethan took her hand, something he'd started doing recently, casual touches that felt momentous every time. "Come on, there's something I want to show you." He led her away from the party to a quieter corner where someone had set up a display board. Clara recognized it immediately, Emma's artwork, dozens of drawings documenting the past year. The first showed stick figures under the overpass. The latest showed a building with windows and doors and people smiling inside. "Emma's been keeping a visual record," Ethan explained. "She calls it the story of how Ms. Clara saved everyone. I tried to tell her you didn't save everyone, that it was a team effort, but she's stubborn." He smiled. "Gets that from her mother, too." Clara studied the drawings, seeing the story unfold, the ladle growing, people moving into homes, her and Ethan working side by side in dozens of scenes. In every picture, Emma had drawn them standing close together, sometimes holding hands, always smiling. "She notices things," Clara said softly. She does. Ethan turned to face her, still holding her hand. Clara, this past year has been the most challenging and rewarding of my life. I've watched you transform from someone who measured worth in spreadsheets to someone who measures it in lives changed. I've watched you risk everything you built to help people you didn't know. I've watched you become part of our lives in ways I never expected. Clara's heart was hammering now. Ethan, let me finish, he said gently. I loved my wife. I'll always love her. But Sarah's been gone 4 years, and Emma needs more than just memories of her mother. She needs someone who's actually present, who shows up, who cares. And Clara, you've shown up, not just for the foundation, but for us, for Emma, and for me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Clara's breath stopped entirely. I'm not proposing, Ethan said quickly, seeing her expression. Not yet. That's too fast, and we both know it. But I wanted you to have this as a promise that when the time is right, I'm going to ask. Because I'm falling in love with you, Clara Wells. And I hope, you might be falling for me too. He opened the box to reveal a simple necklace with a small pendant shaped like a ladle. Clara laughed through sudden tears at the perfect absurdity of it. It's ridiculous, she said. It's perfect, Ethan countered, taking the necklace out and fastening it around her neck. It's a reminder of where we started, of the night you followed your janitor and found something you weren't looking for. I found everything I was looking for, Clara corrected, her voice thick with emotion. I just didn't know it yet. She kissed him then, there in the quiet corner while the party continued nearby. It was their first kiss, and it tasted like possibility and promise and the kind of hope that comes from choosing to see people rather than looking away. When they returned to the party, Emma squealed and ran over. Did you ask her? Did you give her the present? I did, Ethan confirmed. And did she say yes? It wasn't that kind of question, Claire explained, kneeling down. But yes, I said yes to the important part. Emma hugged her fiercely. Good, because I already told everyone at school, you're going to be my mom someday, and it would be really embarrassing if I was wrong. The party continued late into the night. Curtis gave a speech about community and resilience. Anna sang a song in Spanish that made everyone cry, even though most people didn't understand the words. Tommy showed up with a painting he'd done, a beautiful abstract piece in blues and golds, and presented it to Clara as a thank you gift. It's called Hope, he explained, because that's what you gave me. Clara hung it in her office the next day, right behind her desk, where she could see it every time she looked up from her computer. It became her favorite thing in the room, worth more than all her expensive furniture and awards, and the fancy coffee maker that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. The foundation continued to grow. By year 2, they'd expanded to 3 additional sites across the city. By year 3, they were partnering with organizations in 5 other cities to replicate the model. Other corporations started their own initiatives, some inspired by Clara's example, others probably just for the PR value. Clara didn't care about their motivations as long as people were being helped. She and Ethan got married in a small ceremony under the overpass where everything had started. It was Curtis who walked Clara down the aisle, such as it was, and Emma who served as both flower girl and ring bearer. The guest list included board members and homeless families, billionaire donors and volunteers who could barely afford bus fare. It was chaotic and beautiful and absolutely perfect. I can't believe you're marrying your janitor, Marcus joked at the reception, which was held in the Wells Logistics warehouse with catering provided by every restaurant that had ever donated to the foundation. Former janitor, Clara corrected. Now he's the executive director of a foundation that operates on $8 million annually. Still, this time last year, you were the Ice Queen CEO who everyone was afraid to talk to. Now you're married to a guy who serves soup under a bridge. It's quite the character arc. The best one, Clara agreed, watching Ethan dance with Emma across the improvised dance floor. Want to know a secret? Always. I'm happier now than I've ever been. The company's doing better than ever, the foundation is changing lives, and I get to come home every night to people who love me for who I am, not what I've achieved. She smiled at her brother. Turns out Dad was wrong. Success isn't just about building empires. It's about building connections, building community, building a life that actually means something. Marcus hugged her, something he'd started doing more often. I'm proud of you, sis. We all are. 5 years after that night, Clara had followed her janitor through the rain. She stood in the same spot under the same overpass. But everything else had changed. The encampment was gone, replaced by a community center that bore Ethan's name, though he'd protested and tried to have it named after Sarah instead. The Row Center provided services to hundreds of people every week: medical care, job training, legal assistance, mental health counseling, and yes, still soup and blankets for anyone who needed them. Emma was 13 now, passionate about social justice, and already talking about becoming a doctor who worked with homeless populations. She volunteered at the center every weekend, having inherited her mother's optimistic belief that everyone deserved help and her father's practical approach to providing it. Curtis had finally accepted housing, but still came to the center every day, serving as a mentor to people newly experiencing homelessness. "Someone needs to tell them it's not the end," he explained, "that you can come back from this. I'm living proof." Mrs. Chen had started a cooking program, teaching people how to make nutritious meals on limited budgets. Tommy's paintings now sold in galleries, with all proceeds going to mental health programs for homeless individuals. Anna had gotten her citizenship and was working as a translator for the center, helping Spanish-speaking families navigate the system. The original ladle operation had expanded into a network of mobile units serving multiple locations across the city. The foundation had helped over 3,000 people transition into stable housing. Dozens of corporations had started similar programs in their own cities, creating a movement that reached far beyond what Clara could have imagined that night she'd first confronted Ethan in the storage room. Standing there now, Clara felt Ethan's arm around her waist, Emma chattering excitedly about a school project, the sounds of the center full of life and purpose behind her. This was home in a way her expensive penthouse had never been. These were her people. Not just her family, but the extended community they'd built together through stubbornness and hope, and the radical belief that everyone deserved dignity. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked softly. "I'm thinking about numbers," Clara admitted, "but not the kind I used to obsess over. I'm thinking about 40 people who were living under this overpass 5 years ago. About how many of them now have homes, jobs, futures. About the kids like Rosie who are in school instead of sleeping in cardboard boxes. Those are the only numbers that matter anymore." "The CEO still likes her metrics," Ethan teased. "Some things never change." "Some things do," Clara corrected, touching the ladle pendant she still wore every day. "I used to think success meant having the biggest company, the most money, the most power. Now I know it means this: coming home to you and Emma, working on something that actually helps people, measuring my worth in lives changed instead of dollars earned." Emma tugged on Clara's sleeve. "Mom, can we go inside? I want to show you the mural the art class finished. It's so cool. They painted everyone's story on the wall, and I'm in it, right next to Dad and Curtis." "Mom." Emma had started calling her that about a year ago, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. Every time Clara heard it, her heart swelled with a love she hadn't known existed before this strange, beautiful family had claimed her. Inside the center, the mural was stunning. A visual history of the ladle's evolution from stolen supplies and midnight missions to a thriving community organization. Clara found herself in multiple panels, following Ethan's car through rain-soaked streets, serving soup beside him for the first time, standing at the press conference, dancing at their wedding. The final panel showed the center as it was now, full of people and life and color, with text at the bottom that read, "Home is where you choose to stay." "It's Emma's caption," Curtis explained, appearing beside Clara. "From that old Polaroid she took years ago. Seemed fitting." "It's perfect," Clara said, her eyes stinging with tears she no longer bothered to hide. She'd spent so many years being cold and controlled, afraid that showing emotion was weakness. Now she understood that the opposite was true, that allowing herself to feel, to care, to be vulnerable was the strongest thing she'd ever done. Her phone buzzed with a message from her assistant. A crisis at the company, something that would have consumed her entire existence 5 years ago. Now she glanced at it, fired off a quick delegation to her capable COO, and put the phone away. The problem would get solved. It always did. And she had more important things to focus on, like the family waiting for her, the community she'd helped build, the life she'd chosen to live. That evening, Clara and Ethan stood on the small balcony of their apartment, bigger than his old place but still modest by her former standards. watching the sun set over Manhattan. Emma was inside doing homework, music playing softly through the open door. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked. "Giving up the penthouse, the lavish lifestyle, all the things that came with being the ruthless CEO?" Clara thought about it honestly. She lived in Queens now, in a neighborhood where people knew each other's names. She'd downsized her personal spending dramatically, redirecting most of her salary to the foundation. She drove a practical sedan instead of being chauffeured. She shopped at the same grocery store as everyone else, instead of having organic produce delivered. And she was happier than she'd ever been. "I didn't give anything up," Clara said. "I traded things that didn't matter for things that do. Fair exchange." She leaned against him, feeling his solid warmth. "Besides, I kept the most important thing, the company. I just changed what I used it for." "Sarah would have liked you," Ethan said suddenly. "She would have loved watching you transform, loved seeing you choose people over profit." "I wish I could have known her." "In a way you do. Emma's her living legacy. And the ladle, the whole foundation, it's built on her philosophy, on the idea that having more than enough means having enough to share." Ethan pulled Clara closer. "You didn't just save me that night you followed my car. You saved her memory too. You took what she believed in and made it bigger than either of us could have alone." Clara watched the city lights begin to flicker on as darkness fell, each one representing lives being lived, struggles being fought, small victories being won. Somewhere out there, someone was sleeping warm tonight because of what they'd built. Someone was eating a hot meal. Someone was getting medicine they needed. Someone was remembering that they mattered. Numbers, Clara thought, but the kind that counted. Her father had died believing that business failure meant personal failure, that worth could be measured only in profits and success. He'd been wrong. Worth was measured in moments like this, in Emma's laughter from inside the apartment, in Curtis's daily presence at the center, in Rosie's dreams of becoming a teacher, in Tommy's slowly quieting voices. Worth was measured in choosing to stay, choosing to see, choosing to care even when it was hard. The next morning, Clara stood in her office at Wells Logistics, looking at Tommy's painting of hope and Emma's framed drawing and the photos that now covered her walls. Images of the center, the people they'd helped, the community they'd built. Her corner office looked different now, felt different. It was no longer a fortress of isolation, but a command center for something that mattered. Her assistant buzzed. "Ms. Wells, there's a young woman here. Says she's homeless, heard about the foundation, needs help. Should I send her to the center?" Clara thought about it for only a second. "No, send her in. I'll talk to her myself." Because that's what she did now. That's who she'd become. Not the CEO who delegated everything, who kept human suffering at arm's length, who measured worth only in spreadsheets and profit margins. She was Clara Wells, who'd followed her janitor into the darkness and found light. Who'd learned that the best investment wasn't in stocks or property, but in people. Who'd discovered that success meant choosing humanity over efficiency, connection over isolation, love over fear. The young woman who entered her office was maybe 20, carrying everything she owned in 2 plastic bags, her eyes full of desperation and wary hope. Clara recognized that look, had seen it countless times over the past 5 years. It was the look of someone at the end of their rope, reaching out one more time before giving up entirely. "Sit down," Clara said gently, coming around her desk. "Tell me your name and your story, and then let's figure out how to help you." As the young woman began to talk, Clara thought about that rainy night 5 years ago when she'd followed Ethan's rusted sedan through Manhattan's underbelly, certain she was chasing a thief. She'd been right about the theft, just wrong about what mattered most. Ethan had stolen supplies, yes, but more importantly, he'd stolen her certainty, her comfortable blindness, her ice-cold logic that had protected her from caring too much. And in return, he'd given her everything that mattered. A family, a purpose, a life that felt lived rather than merely managed. The ability to look at herself in the mirror and recognize the woman staring back. That night, Clara came home to find Ethan making dinner while Emma practiced violin in the living room, badly but enthusiastically. The sound that had once have driven her crazy now made her smile. This was chaos. This was messy. This was real. How was your day? Ethan asked, kissing her as she dropped her briefcase by the door. I helped someone, Clara said. Just one person. But it felt like enough. It's always enough, Ethan assured her. One person at a time. That's how we change the world. Clara thought about Curtis's words from 5 years ago, about starting where you are with what you have, about showing up and doing what you could, and hoping it mattered. She thought about her father, about the empire he'd lost, and the life he'd wasted believing success was singular and unforgiving. She thought about Tommy's painting, about hope being something you chose rather than something you found. And she thought about the ladle pendant around her neck, the physical reminder that sometimes following people into the darkness was the only way to find your way into the light. I love you, she told Ethan, the words still feeling new and precious every time she said them. I love you too, he replied. Thank you for following me that night. Thank you for stealing from me, Clara answered, and they both laughed at the absurdity and truth of it. Outside, rain began to fall on Manhattan, washing the streets clean, creating halos around the streetlights, soaking the city in possibility. Somewhere under an overpass, people were gathering for soup and blankets, and the kind of kindness that saves lives. Somewhere in Queens, a family was sitting down to dinner together, counting blessings instead of dollars. Somewhere in the space between what was and what could be, hope was taking root and growing. And in a modest apartment that smelled like garlic and sounded like violin practice, Clara Wells, former ice queen, current human being, closed her eyes and understood that she'd finally found the one number that mattered most. The number was simple. It was 3. One former CEO, one former janitor, one daughter who'd never let either of them forget what mattered. A family built not from perfection, but from choosing each other, choosing kindness, choosing to stay. Home, it turned out, was exactly where you chose to be.